There was a new poll out from Public Affairs Council and Morning Consult. And what this poll found was that while the news media is trusted as a primary source for what's going on, 46% of Americans say they trust the news media, 71% of Americans said that they trust their friends and neighbors as a source of media more than the news media, 71%. Now, what that means is that you, as a Free Speech TV viewer, are well informed on what's going on, far more so than the average person. So you have an opportunity now to be the news source for your friends, your neighbors, your family, whether it's on Facebook or talking to people at the store or your next door neighbors or whatever it may be. And you have an opportunity to let them know about this great news source here, Free Speech TV. Tell them how they can find it. You can go to freespeech.org. You can find all the places where people can watch Free Speech TV. Thank you. Our book today is Warrior Is by Harley Zephyr and Robin Zephyr. It's an absolutely brilliant book about Native Americans and Native American history. This is from page 428 in the chapter Approach. Sitting Bull was one of the most recognizable and yet disliked Lakota leaders according to the U.S. military and the white society as a whole. This was the case thanks to the heavily promoted misinformation about and fear of and general prejudice against the Lakota and Indian people in general. The non-treating signing Lakota, of whom Sitting Bull was one, had been unfairly portrayed as hostiles. Also, the whites feared Sitting Bull because he was the manifestation of the hostiles as stereotyped in the U.S. media, especially in the media of the Midwestern section of the Great Plains at the time, such as the Bismarck Tribune. The dislike of Sitting Bull and his Lakota followers, and of all bands of Lakota, was perpetuated by the U.S. military's portrayal of the Hunkpapa Lakota leader as well. Sitting Bull, ever since the early 1850s, the beginning of the encroachment of the whites onto the Lakota's Aboriginal homelands, was a vocal and easily recognized proponent of preserving the Lakota's traditional way of life, the free, sovereign, nomadic lifestyle that the Lakota were meant to live. The Hunkpapa leader was a gifted leader with a spiritual aura about him that allowed him to communicate with all beings through the natural energy of the spirit world. Sitting Bull was very outspoken and was often quoted when speaking about how he viewed the natural world and the clash of cultures. Here are some of his famous quotations. "What white man can ever say I stole his land or a penny of his money, yet they say I'm a thief? If we must die, we die defending our rights. What treaty that the whites have kept has the red man broken? Not one. Strangely enough, they have a mind to till the soil, and the love of possessions is a disease in them. The earth has received the embrace of the sun, and we shall see the results of that love. Each man is good in his sight. It is not necessary for eagles to be crows. Let us put our minds together and see what life we can make for our children. It is through this mysterious power that we too have our being, and we therefore yield to our neighbors, even to our animal neighbors, the same rights as we ourselves have to inhabit this vast land." End of quotes. Because of his prominent position among his own people and among the Lakota in general, Sitting Bull was a force. When he chose to align with the young Ninkoju warrior by the name of Spirit Horse, the two men made a formidable pair. Sitting Bull with his spiritual and charismatic leadership abilities, and Spirit Horse with his finely honed experience in military tactics, protocol planning, and strategy, a great source of battle knowledge and unlimited courage and fearlessness. Sitting Bull, however, would continue his efforts to seek peace and diplomacy with the United States and its military leaders, especially Custer, Grant, Sheridan, Terry, and Crook. The U.S. military, and especially the Dakota Territory military leadership, all at once feared and admired and disdained the two Lakota leaders. The United States feared them for their notorious nature, their popularity among the Lakota people, and their innate ability to continue to frustrate the general policies of the U.S. government. The United States and its officials were trying to tame and soothe the Indians, so to lure them into signing away all their land holdings and rights by agreeing to the so-called treaties. Many other Lakota headmen agreed to sign these treaties. Many Lakota believed that to be something that would lead to the future detriment of the Lakota. Terry, Sheridan, Grant, Sherman, and Custer all had personal feelings about the Lakota and about men like Sitting Bull. In the 1860s, through the time period of the lead up to the Powder River Campaign of 1876, the U.S. military became committed to removing, eliminating, annihilating, and destroying all of the Lakota, but especially Sitting Bull. Sheridan would be heard saying to Terry, "The only good Indian I ever saw were dead," or stating that the U.S. will break him, Sitting Bull, and his people, using the metaphor of a controlling owner breaking his horse, taming it so it could be ridden, or indicating how the controlling master breaks a slave, not to rebel or resist, leading the slave to merely submit and give in to the master's will. A big part of the reason why the U.S. military's hatred toward Sitting Bull and the Lakota intensified was the issue of the gold in the Hisapa. The desire to obtain that gold rose to prominence in the minds of the greedy government officials and private business ventures. The financial and mining interests were foaming at the mouth, wanting to get their hands on the Black Hills. No matter the desires, feelings, rights, or very lives of the Lakota, the United States was determined to possess the Black Hills at any cost, whether in effort, in money, or lost lives, or in lost honor and humanity. It became an obsession for many in private business and in the U.S. government and military. And that obsession spread like a dark poisonous snake had bitten them all, and had spread the vile poison of greed, vanity, covetousness, death, and destruction. Having become overbearing, it soaked into the souls, minds, spirits, and what was left of the hearts of the men calling the shots. Ironically, even Custer acknowledged how the Indians likely felt about the encroachment of the whites, saying, quote, "If I were an Indian, I would greatly prefer to cast my lot among those of my people who adhere to the free open plains, rather than submit to the confined limits of a reservation." This warrior is.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. Well, it's Columbus Day, so Washington, D.C. has the day off, but all the rest of us are working. And, you know, it's Columbus Day. Are we still celebrating? Actually, we're not so much anymore. You know, a rapist and murderer and child sex slave participant. I mean, you know, Columbus actually wrote back to the King of Spain saying, you know, these slaves, they're as good as gold. And, well, here's what he said. He said, "They are well built with good bodies and handsome features. They do not bear arms and do not know them, for I showed them a sword, and they took it by the edge and cut themselves out of ignorance. They have no iron. Their spears are made of cane. They would make fine servants. With 50 men, we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want." here there are so many of these slaves, although they are living things, they are good as gold. And, of course, you know, Columbus went on to say the 10-year-old girls that was actually the top of the market for them. But, you know, Kavanaugh was sworn in over the, so, you know, but it seems like, you know, we don't celebrate Columbus Day anymore outside of maybe the Italian-American community, which does make a lot of sense because it was Spain who funded this thing, wasn't it? But in any case, I think the days of Columbus Day are over. And in fact, in many parts of America, this is Indigenous Peoples Day. And for that, I tip my hat. We did our book reading this morning on our TV side with Warrior Is, this book by Harley and Robin Zephyr, which is just an absolutely brilliant book about the history of Native Americans, particularly the 18th and 19th century histories. It's just remarkable. Meanwhile, Brett Kavanaugh was sworn in over the weekend. There's going to be another. They're swearing him in like 4 times, right? Roberts did it, and then Trump is going to do it, and somebody else did it, and, you know, I don't know what all, but they're doing all these, quote, ceremonies because, you know, oh, they're so happy about this. And people are walking around going, oh, we're so sad we lost this one. Hey, this one was lost when the vote came in from Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. This, you know, the Kavanaugh thing was sealed with the election of Trump. Trump campaigned, I'm going to put people on the court who are going to overturn Roe v. Wade and who are going to interpret the Constitution using originalism. In other words, they're going to think the same way the white male slaveholding founders did back when women and people of color had no right to vote, no rights under the Constitution, and of course, slaves weren't even considered in the Constitution, except for purposes in the South, 3/5 of them being counted toward congressional representation. So yeah, originalism. Let's go back to that mindset. Well, they really are. I mean, they really are. But let me finish this first thought first. You know, we've got a lot of people going, oh, we're losing, you know, isn't that a terrible thing? I don't think so. I mean, like I said, this confirmation was a done deal 2 years ago, as was Gorsuch's. You put a Republican on in the White House, you're going to get right-wing crazies on the Supreme Court. The fact of the matter is that if it hadn't been for the Bush v. Gore decision, and it hadn't been for Russian intervention in the election, both of which flipped our elections, Al Gore would have been president, and Hillary Clinton would have been president. And right now, there would be a 7-2 progressive majority on the Supreme Court, had it not been for these 2 events. But in any case, you know, we got Trump, we got Kavanaugh. What a shock. But are we losing? Come on, you know, Trump just mobilized millions of women. You know, back in 91, when they did this to Clarence Thomas in the election in 92, women just mopped the floor with men. Terrible, terrible metaphor, isn't it? You get my point. You know, I mean, this is when Dianne Feinstein got into the Senate, and Patty Murray from Washington State. They both ran for the Senate as a result of how Anita Hill was treated in the Clarence Thomas hearings. And they're still there. Plus, Trump is being investigated by Mueller. Plus, Trump is being investigated by New York State for a $500 million tax fraud. Plus, there's an election coming in 3.5 weeks. I mean, you know, we'll see who's winning. We'll see. I mean, we can have this conversation after the election, but right now, I'm not willing to despair. In fact, I would say, you know, Charles Blow has a piece in the New York Times today. Maybe it was yesterday. Yeah, it was yesterday, October 7th. Titled, Liberals, This is War. And what he's pointing out is that this is part of a conservative plan. And by conservatives, we're talking about privileged white men and the women who are subservient to them. That this is a much larger power play by these so-called conservatives to enshrine and protect white male power in the United States. You know, in a way, it reminds me of apartheid South Africa. as the white men who ran apartheid South Africa gave up their power, which was a pretty remarkable thing when you think about it, there was this period of transition. Well, we're not going through that period of transition. We sort of started that in the 60s, the civil rights movement and all that. But now, they want to roll all that back. And in fact, the Supreme Court has already gutted the Voting Rights Act. And this is why they talk about originalism, right? Originalism is just a way of saying, those founders who owned slaves and, beat them and raped them, black people were not human, didn't have the right to vote, didn't have the right to work, didn't have the right to, frankly, live. Women couldn't vote, couldn't participate, couldn't own property. Poor white men couldn't vote in many states. The founders were a bunch of rich, powerful white men who didn't want true democracy, writes Charles Blow. And in fact, he says they were dreadfully afraid of it, and he's right. It's why we got the Electoral College. It's why small states have 2 senators. And now a bunch of rich, powerful white men want to change the way our court systems work so that we're looking at laws in the context of that, through that frame. For example, this is what it's all about with regard to Trump's hysteria around illegal immigration. Those are not privileged white men coming into this country. In fact, he wants to change our immigration laws so that only privileged white men and their women can come into this country. That's why he's demonizing the visa lottery program. It mostly has people from Africa coming into the United States. This is what voter disenfranchisement is all about. This is what interstate cross-check and Chris Kobach is all about. Find those people who have common last names, blacks, African Americans, Latinos, and Asians, and get them off the voting rolls. Ultimately, this is what their call for a constitutional convention is all about. This is the direction it is all going right now. And to speed it up, the Republicans are actually lying. I don't have a clip sheet yet, Nate. I don't know what we've got here, but you do have Trump's lies. Yeah, I'll do those after I get the clip sheet. But here's Donald Trump last night lying about the Democratic Party. Before we play this, let me just say, for the record, there is not a single piece of Democratic legislation saying we should have open borders. Never has been, never will be. It's not the Democratic Party's position. It's not Democrats' position. In fact, Democrats are in favor of a high-tech border rather than a stupid border, one that allows animals to migrate and things like that, but catches people, and strengthening our immigration laws. But Donald Trump has to shout out to his frightened white base on Fox News with lies. Simple lies. Here he is.
Every single Democrat in the U.S. Senate has signed up for the open borders, and it's a bill. It's called the Open Borders Bill. What's going on? And it's written by, guess who? Dianne Feinstein.
This is just a complete lie. Literally, there is no such thing. So when the President of the United States lies to the people about the opposition party, what the hell is going on? Is this like Hitler talking about how Jews were using Aryan children's blood to make matzah? Is this, are we to blood libel here? What the hell is going on? Well, I think we already know. They will stop at nothing. That's what we know.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
But there are things we can do, and I'm going to get into that after the break. It's 16 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Laura in Detroit, Michigan, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Laura, what's on your mind today?
Hi, morning. I'm just calling because I'm seeing a lot of Republicans downplaying just how angry we are in this country as to what happened. But I want everyone to remember what they've done can be undone. And we have to keep our eyes on the 2 Supreme Court justice seats that they have their eye on. Thomas, they will begin to put pressure on him after the midterms to retire.
Oh, no, Thomas is on their side. Thomas is just as crazy as the rest of them.
Oh, I agree with that. But what I'm saying, he's not a young man anymore.
Oh, I see. So they want to replace him with somebody. They want to replace him with Amy Coney Bryant, who's 46 years old.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To devastate a generation beyond a generation.
Yeah, you're right. You're probably right.
And we know that RBG will not be around forever as much as we would love her to be.
Right.
And we need to keep our eye on the fact that with Thomas's seat alone, we know he probably will not retire if a Democrat is in the White House. But he would if there were a Republican in the White House. So we need to keep that in mind. Also, I've been seeing tweeted where there's no set number that in the Constitution regarding how many Supreme Court justices can be on the bench.
Right.
And we need to stop playing softball and start playing hardball.
Yep.
And if we want to undo this mess, we have to start playing. It's like the old saying goes, don't hate the player, hate the game.
Yeah. Yeah, and there have been 2 times in the history of the United States where Congress has altered the number of people on the Supreme Court explicitly to block a president from adding new people. This would be slightly different. This would be more like Franklin Roosevelt tried to do in 1937 and then stopped because he suddenly started getting his way when Justice Roberts and Justice Hughes, the Chief Justice Hughes and Justice Roberts, the 2 right-wingers, started voting left-wing in 37. But the first one was in 1800 when Thomas Jefferson was coming into the White House. And the court was set at 6 originally by the Judiciary Act 1798. And in 1800, when that election happened, they reduced the number of members of the court to 5 so that Jefferson couldn't add anybody. But then over time, they had to increase the number of members of the court because those guys also rode the circuits. And so they got all the way up to 10 when Lincoln was in power. And when Andrew Jackson took over after Lincoln's assassination, the Republicans who controlled the House and Senate were so horrified that Jackson, who had been a slave owner himself, was going to make appointments to the Supreme Court, that they reduced it down to 7. And with the theory that the people on the court would just retire when they retired and nobody would replace them. So Andrew Johnson would never have a chance to put somebody on the Supreme Court, which he never did. As soon as Johnson was out of office and Ulysses S. Grant followed him, so as soon as they had a safe anti-slavery Republican in the White House, then they took it back up to 10. And after that, actually they took it back up to 9, and it's been there pretty much ever since. So, yeah, there is a precedent. There are 2 different precedents for Congress changing the number of members of the Supreme Court for political purposes. Laura, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I told you there's a bigger picture here to everything that I started ranting about this morning. I just want to finish that rant, and then we'll pick up your phone calls. I mentioned that the appointment of Judge Kavanaugh, Bart Kavanaugh, to the Supreme Court has seriously pissed off lots and lots of women across the United States. And, seriously, including Republican women and particularly independent and Democratic women. And at the same time, Mike and Karen Pence, remember Purvi Patel I was telling you about last week? Purvi Patel was a woman in India, excuse me. She was a woman in Indiana who had a stillborn child. And she was arrested and sentenced to 30 years. Well, she was facing 30 years in prison. She was sentenced to 20 years with 10 years deferred or something for violating a Mike Pence a law that Mike Pence loved, the feticide law in Indiana, for killing her baby, right? They thought that she had induced an abortion. There was no evidence of that. There were no abortifacient drugs in her bloodstream. But they were going to sentence her to prison anyway until a federal judge overturned this ruling in this local Indiana court saying, no, you can't do this. And Purvi Patel is now free. She was the second person to be prosecuted under the Indiana law. Both of them were freed by the court. Well, now Karen Pence is going to campaign for a guy by the name of Mark Harris. And Mark Harris is a former preacher. And here are some of the things Mark Harris has said. He's facing, by the way, Democrat Dan McCready. In fact, if you want to get even, toss some money to Dan McCready. The guy that Karen Pence is going to campaign for says, quote, women have lost basic skills like how to prepare a meal, how to sew on a button, how to keep a home. He quotes Ephesians 5:22. He says, Ephesians, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as unto the Lord. In one survey from February 3rd, 2013, he said the majority of marital problems could be linked to couples not following that guidance. He said many marriages could save beaucoup of marriage counseling if they would just understand. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Wives, submit yourself unto your husbands as unto the Lord. He said women should submit to their husbands because the Lord ordained it. So Karen Pence is going to campaign for this guy. And white nationalists are melting down over Taylor Swift because she has endorsed now the Democrat in Tennessee, Phil Bredesen, who is running for the U.S. Senate. And over on 4chan, we must save her, writes one distraught white nationalist. Another says, stupid B-word, doesn't respect the Trump curse. She has to learn the hard way. Another one says, she's going to die of a stroke this month as divine retribution for her betrayal. But now you've got people like Max Boot calling for, he's a lifelong Republican. Now, he is an immigrant to the United States. He came here when he was 6 years old. He's Jewish. And he's saying that's it. He said they will double down on white nationalism and racism and xenophobia and undermining the rule of law. This will be solidified as the core part of the Republican identity. That's why I think it's essential that Republicans pay a price at the ballot box for what they are doing. And that's why I'm urging, this is Max Boot, the Republican commentator. That's why I'm urging, as somebody who is a lifelong Republican who never voted for a Democrat, having said all that, I'm urging everybody to vote straight ticket Democratic in November because I think it's imperative to get some checks and balances. But when Donald Trump tells lies like this, what is the antidote? What is the corrective? When Karen Pence is going out campaigning for a guy like this, what is the corrective? Well, Donald Trump knows what that corrective is, and he's trying to kneecap it in advance. In fact, he started his presidency trying to kneecap it. That corrective is the free press. Yesterday, the day before yesterday on Fox News, Donald Trump went on with Jeanine Pirro and said that there should be consequences for those who accused Kavanaugh of sexual assault. Consequences. Meanwhile, in Bulgaria, a young woman, Victoria Marinova, she's 30 years old. She's a professional journalist. She had, last week, she was reporting, she has her own news show. It's called Detector. And in her first episode, this is recent, she just launched this like a month ago. In her first episode, she had two investigative reporters talking about, quote, large-scale, widespread corruption on EU-funded projects in Bulgaria. This is basically the government of Bulgaria stealing millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars from the EU. Well, here's the story. A popular Bulgarian journalist, this is what happens when you hate the news, who had reported on an investigation into alleged corruption involving EU funds, was raped and beaten to death. The semi-nude body of 30-year-old Victoria Marinova was found in the park in the Danube town of Rus on Saturday. She had been beaten with such force that she was unrecognizable, according to the Federation of European Journalists. She is the fourth high-profile journalist to be killed in Europe since the beginning of 2017. Amazing. So if you want to have a balance, number one, we got a lot of great Democrats. Jackie Rosen's going up against Dean Heller in Nevada, for example, this year. Dean Heller voted yes on Kavanaugh. You got a lot of great candidates, and
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
you've got some great media outlets like the one that you are listening to this program on. We need to strengthen our media and our press and spread the word. Years of strategy and struggle against the prison industrial complex. It's a collection of essays. This one is by David Gilbert on page 31, titled "The System Within the System, the Prison Industrial Complex and Imperialism." For those of us held behind locked gates within the walls and fences topped with razor wire, the corrections regime is the system that works tirelessly to impose total control over every aspect of our lives. Yet as ponderous and powerful as prisons are, they're only one part, a central girder, of a much bigger and more foreboding house of horrors, which can most accurately be named imperialism. The structural needs of the larger edifice set the specifications for the size and position of the girder. The strength of the girder helps determine how long the building itself will stand. We can't understand the explosion of imprisonment in the United States since 1971 without looking at an imperialism's urgent needs and goals of that period. By the same token, we can't develop an effective program around the prison industrial complex without grappling with the stresses and trends of the larger system of imperial rule. To be clear, before you take time to read this chapter, I don't offer any brilliant ideas on strategy. Those will most likely emerge from the organizing and activist efforts themselves. However, some of the concerns discussed may raise questions that go into forming strategy. I definitely look forward to learning from the dialogues that this generates on these issues. Imperialism may sound like the kind of rhetoric we want to avoid, but it's one word that needs to be rescued as the best way to name the system that rules over us. The basis of imperialism is the relentless quest for profits around the globe. Its most striking characteristic is the colossal and grotesque polarization of wealth. That polarization happens between nations, between the rich countries of the North and the impoverished ones of the global South, the impoverished countries of Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia, and at the same time within each country based on class, race, and gender. The poles of dazzling wealth and abject poverty are intimately linked, as the former results from the ruthless plunder of the latter. This system is built on and intensifies all the major forms of oppression: patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy, all of which are structurally central. At the same time, imperialism highlights the global character of the system in a way that explains why the most intense oppression and resistance have been in the South, and that also provides the context for why the liberation struggles of the various people of color have been in the forefront within the U.S. There's no way to capture what the system costs in human life and potential, the pain and loss for all of us. Close to 1 billion human beings suffer chronic hunger, while another 2 billion face nutritional deficiencies. 1 billion lack access to clean drinking water. Just looking at children under the age of 5, imperialism is a holocaust in progress. Over 9 million die every year from easily preventable causes associated with poverty. The price for future generations may be even more severe as the rapaciousness of this global frenzy for profits threatens the very ecological basis for sustaining human life on any scale on our planet. Since most people won't accept living in squalor amid plenty, imperialism entails both the most sophisticated and the most brutal forms of social control. Its most salient feature is war, war after war after war, mainly against the peoples of the South. The domestic front line of such repression is a truly violent and harmful prison industrial complex. Today, 2,300,000 people are held behind bars, about 7 times the number in 1971. That explosion was unprecedented, coming after a 70-year period when the rates of imprisonment had remained more or less constant. This dramatic change did not result from some sudden skyrocketing of criminal activity, but rather from a radical expansion of what was designated as a crime and a draconian increase in the punishments for those crimes. Such extreme measures were driven by considerations way beyond criminal justice and often at cross purposes to the proclaimed goal of public safety. These destructive changes were born from crisis, one much more severe and protracted than the periodic ups and downs of the business cycles that occur over a roughly 10-year period, but rather a situation that threatened the very survival of the system. Such structural crises occur because capitalism is by its nature unstable. The economy is vast and complicated, but the major decisions are made by a tiny corporate and financial elite, with each thinking only of his own profits. When a structural crisis develops, the long-term institutional arrangements that assured a reliable flow of profits and the rule of capital no longer function. One dramatic example was the Great Depression of the 1930s, followed by World War II. At the end of that period, a new set of international institutions, such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, were created. At the same time, a new deal was hammered out for the terms of the bargain between capital and labor within the U.S. Those arrangements worked well for capital until they broke down a generation later. That new structural crisis, which emerged between 1968 and 73, is the seedbed for the burgeoning of the prison-industrial complex and many related changes in U.S. history. The first and most obvious signs were political, as the resistance to imperialism crested in 1968. Abolition now.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and picking up your phone calls here. Thomas in Lansing, Michigan. Hey, Thomas, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm well. What's up?
First of all, to all progressives out there, please vote voters if you like to bring it on it, and take a friend while you're at it.
Yep.
My question for you, and I'll take your answer when I come off the line, is there any Senate rule that Mitch McConnell violated when he denied Judge Garland his right to a hearing after his appointment by President Obama?
No, to the best of my knowledge, there is not. If there was, the Democratic senators would have been talking about it by now. He arguably violated the Constitution. The Constitution doesn't specify a time period between when the president appoints a Supreme Court justice and when the Senate does their advice and consent. But, you know, I can't imagine any of the founders or framers saying, you know, this was appropriate. Mitch McConnell, you know, basically broke the Senate. And it's going to take a long time for the U.S. Senate to recover from the damage that Mitch McConnell has done. And it was all in the service of this billionaire-funded Federalist Society facilitated get 5 Federalist Society members on the court because they are the reliable toadies of the billionaire group that is now increasingly running this country and the world. And, you know, not to sound too much like Alex Jones, but there it is. I mean, and that's what's going on, Thomas. Thanks a lot for the call. Clarence in Tulare County, California. Hey, Clarence, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, how you doing? I just need to know one thing, and it's real quick. The FBI, what is their position as far as having a list of things they can do to investigate any of the situation with Trump? I don't understand that. I thought the FBI was one of those units that they know what to do, and will go to any link to get it completed.
The FBI, when it comes to crimes, I don't know how autonomous the FBI is. I think that they're quite autonomous, but it may be that they require Justice Department approval for any investigation. I don't know, Clarence. What I do know is that in this case, the investigation of Brett Kavanaugh's the sexual assault case, you know, claims against him, The FBI was able to be very narrowly circumscribed in their investigation. And on the other hand, apparently under Mueller and Rosenstein, they're conducting a fairly thorough investigation, all-encompassing investigation of the crimes of Donald Trump and Russia. So I don't know.
So, I mean, what do we that's the point, and I didn't understand that idea, and I'm an old man, so I just didn't understand.
Yeah, if there is going to be an investigation of Bart Kavanaugh, Barfo Kavanaugh, then that investigation is probably going to happen in the House of Representatives in January, or it'll begin in January, if the Democrats take the House.
A lot of time and money is we go so far and then we get slapped back.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Clarence, for the call. Bob in Eagle Rock, California. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Hey, hi, Tom. Yesterday on Meet the Press, Chuck Todd was talking with Susan Collin about a Fund Me page on Facebook that raised a couple of $1 million.
Yeah, it's up to $3 million.
The money was supposed, something like that. They were supposed to go to the opponent if she voted no on Kavanaugh. Now, her response was very telling to me. She was very indignant, and she said that they are trying to buy my vote, and they want a quid pro quo. I think she misses the point, don't you? This is not the Koch brothers from Nebraska. This is organized Maine voters and other people in the country who are telling their elected representatives they must support their view or we're going to vote them out.
Right.
Sounds like democracy to me.
It sounds like democracy to me, too. Susan Collins doesn't give a rat's ass about democracy. She has been a loyal Republican toady for a long, long time. And she will continue to be as long as the citizens of Maine vote her in, which I have a feeling is going to come to an end in about 2 years. Bob, thanks for the call. I just don't think that she survives this, frankly. When you look back at what happened to the politicians who supported the Clarence Thomas, it really, really seriously hurt some of those people. So, again, Jackie Rosen is running against Dean Heller in Nevada. There are actually a whole bunch of good Democrats running for office who, we can be supporting. So, I encourage you to consider that. Yolanda in Stanway, Washington. Hey, Yolanda, what's up?
Good morning, Tom. Sorry, I just put a piece of toast in my mouth.
That's okay. I'm sorry. It's like the waiter, right? He always asks the question just as you're about to, just as you've taken a bite.
The observation that just came out this week, I saw it on ABC, that here in Seattle, we've had problems with our police department. Yeah, they're not very nice to our constituents, to our people. And now, they don't have enough police. So now they spend thousands of dollars with billboards to collect experienced police officers from the most notorious places of bad police officers back east in the Midwest.
Mm. Yeah, the cop who killed Tamir Rice just got a job with a Midwestern, as I recall, or maybe the Northeastern smaller police department.
So they're already setting up. People call me the crazy conspiracy theorist person, but you have to look ahead. They're setting it up. Yeah. Police state. They're setting it up, and it's just so blatantly obvious. I don't know. Sometimes I get scared. I say I need to go crawl in a hole, but we can't. Of course, we can't. So. But we just need to be aware. We just can't let this happen. We're a purely democratic state, and yet we've got some real uglies, just like Oregon. Yep. They're not. They're there.
Yeah, no, they're all over, and Fox News is causing them to proliferate. But you're spot on, Yolanda. We need to be pushing back, and we are. And that's the good news. And thank you for the call. And that's what's going on. Jared in Downingtown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jared, what's up?
Happy Indigenous Peoples Day, Tom.
Thank you, Jared. Back at you.
Anytime. I want to talk about this Kavanaugh freak. I saw the writing on the wall probably around the time Trump tweeted about the FBI saying that they he didn't order any, limitations on how they could search, which means, of course, he did.
Right. Yeah, Trump just lied to us. He just plain old flat up lied to us.
He always lies. Anything he says, anything he says is the opposite of what he says. So, this is basically our Sykes-Picot moment for us. This is the stab in the back moment. But what can we do to fuel that rage? I don't have a problem with rage as long as it's on our side. Right. As long as people are angry about the fact that they don't have health care, that they're angry about the fact that we're spending trillions and trillions of dollars on the military industrial complex that is killing people overseas, killing U.S. soldiers overseas, and the fact that it's going to make the planet uninhabitable.
Yeah.
And we have
what can we do? I mean, Dean Heller and Ted Cruz both voted for Barfo Kavanaugh, and Jackie Rosen is running against Dean Heller in Nevada. You can throw money her way. And Beto O'Rourke is running against Ted Cruz in Texas. You could throw money his way. You've got Heidi Heitkamp, who took a tough and principled vote up in North Dakota, I believe it is. And you could support her. She's not a progressive Democrat. She's sort of a middle-of-the-road Democrat. But, hey, we need as many Democrats as we can get right now. And coming up in 2 years, the following Republican senators are going to be up for re-election. Cory Gardner in Colorado. I mean, wherever you are, you can start the work against these people right now. Cory Gardner in Colorado, David Perdue in Georgia, Joni Ernst in Iowa. They all supported Brett Kavanaugh. Mitch McConnell in Kentucky, Susan Collins in Maine, Tom Tillis in North Carolina, and Lindsey Graham in South Carolina. And that's the work, among others, right? And then you've got all these members of the House of Representatives as well. But this is where we start, Jared, to the extent, and a lot of people say, well, I can't give any money. Well, you can do a phone bank from your home and just say, I'll give an hour a day for a week, or I'll give an hour a week, and I'll give 3 hours on Saturday, whatever. Contact the local campaigns and they will work. They'll tell you how to do it. They'll show you how to do it. So there's lots of ways to go about this, and thank you for pulling it up. Randy in Stanwood, Washington. Hey, Randy, thanks for listening to KBCS. What's up?
Hey, Tom. The Republicans have declared a war on women. Democrats need to shout it out and vote them out. Yep. All of them.
Yep.
Local, state, federal, all Republican candidates.
Well, this is what Max Boot is calling for goodness sake. I mean, here he is, this iconic Republican author and op-ed writer, and author, is just saying, vote a straight Democratic ticket, Republicans, please. Back to you, Randy.
Absolutely. Yeah. They all need to be accused. All Republican candidates on every level need to be accused of being complicit in this war on women. It has to be, and
it's not just a war on women. Let's be very clear about this, Randy. This is a war on workers, and it has been waged through the Supreme Court for the last 40 years, tearing apart the Wagner Act, the National Labor Relations Act, and destroying union rights in the United States. This is a war on the environment. And
it's a war on our way of life.
It is absolutely. I mean, they are, with the single exception of trying to change our trade laws, which is getting Donald Trump a lot of traction and a lot of benefit and a lot of praise, because it's a Democratic position that has been held by the Democratic Party forever. We had this weird aberration where Bill Clinton pulled us away from it, and Barack Obama hung out with Bill Clinton on this. But outside of a few wealthy elite Democrats, most of the Democratic Party has always felt that so-called free trade was not fair trade, and it screwed the American worker. And Trump has picked that up and is running with it, and the Democratic Party needs to grab that. And it's a real tough one for them to do it, to say, he's saying the right things. He may not be doing it the way that we would do it. No, but he is. But I know. But my point is that with that single exception, at every level, the Republicans are waging a war against Social Security. They're waging a war against Medicare. They're waging a war against Medicaid. They're waging a war against consumers. They're waging a war against the environment. I mean, it is all over the place. Randy's spot on. Thanks a lot for the call. Well said. Michael in Utah. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Hi, I'm calling from Utah. I just have a real quick comment.
Sure, go for it.
I really support Dianne Feinstein on what she did, and everything she said needed to be said. Now, this is my question. If Dianne Feinstein really did feel like that and believed all those things she said about sexual predators, why didn't she stand up against Bill Clinton?
Yeah. Bill Clinton is going to be, I noticed that Hillary and Bill are going someplace to give a speech or something, some headline about that today. And, and Bill Clinton is increasingly not getting the warm welcome, shall we say, that he used to get. And, for obvious reasons, right? And I don't know how the Democratic Party is going to deal with this other than that, yeah, okay, that happened. He was punished for it. He lost his law license. He was impeached. End of story. I guess that's about it. But, I think that the more Bill Clinton keeps a low profile and stays out of the public eye, probably the better it is for the Democratic Party. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 48 minutes, 10 seconds past the hour. We'll be back. Serious. And welcome back. Let's see here. Matthew in, you declined to say where you are. Hey, Matthew, what's up?
Well, I moved from the west to the south.
Okay.
I don't want to lose my job.
No, it's all good.
My comment is I've been trying to figure out what the Republican Party was, and there was something in the back of the mind. And for people who are as old as us and people who are younger need to do their homework, what the Republican Party reminds me of is the Soviet Union. Whether it's international sports or international diplomacy, you accuse the other of what we're doing, what we're not doing. You break the rules, you stretch the rules, use power to change the rules. And that is just so true.
Yeah, just the exercise of raw power, basically.
Yeah. May I share an additional anecdote about someone who moved from the west to the south?
Sure.
It's truth-telling. I was talking to a colleague of mine. I said, you wouldn't believe the hurdles I had to jump to just to get my driver's license. And his response was, it's not supposed to affect people like you.
I'm sorry, say that again? He said his response was what?
He said, it's not supposed to affect people like you. I'm white.
Oh, jeez. You're a white guy with a job. It's not supposed to affect you, right?
Yeah. I mean, he didn't even realize he said it. I mean, they're good people, but anyway, I'll just leave it there. Thank you. I love
That's an amazing story. Thank you, Matthew. Thanks. Wow. That's incredible. That is absolutely incredible. So, Michael in Denver, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Well, I'll say morning, Tom.
Good morning, Michael.
Thanks you for everything you do, and I've called once before many years ago. I just wanted to ask, first of all, just to preface, I have two people in my family that are survivors of rape and sexual abuse. I'm in my 70s. I serve the country and all, and I'm a minority amongst veterans that is a lifelong Democrat and progressive. I called to ask, do you know of a website or a book that's been written that would be able to give us a breakdown of what the legislative records are of every senator and congressperson in the United States, a breakdown of what they've done since they've been in office, so that we could take out the good and the bad and analyze to see if this person has actually been serving the the wishes of the American people or of corporations and, very small.
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe if anybody watching knows of such a website, please, call in or tweet it to me. Right now, all the lines are full. But if you tweet it to me, I check my Twitter feed periodically throughout the show. And I will share that. There is a website called Open Secrets, Michael, that you can go in and you can look at the campaign contributions and PAC donations and things like that to every member of Congress, although it doesn't track the dark money PACs, where the Koch brothers come in and spend $5 million through Americans for Prosperity or whatever to wipe out somebody or to promote somebody. They can't track those because they're called independent expenditures. They were legalized by the Buckley decision in 1978, or 76, excuse me. But matching a voting record database with a donor record database would be very enlightening. I would love to see something like that. I don't know if such a thing exists, Michael, but we'll keep an eye out for it. If I can find out, I'll let you know. Michael, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann, and welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's 52 minutes past the hour. John in McKees Rocks, Pennsylvania. Hey, John, what's up?
Hey, I appreciate you taking it, Tom. But I do have to call you out on something.
What's up?
Actually, I'm a little disappointed. You're kind of like the mainstream media right now saying in the beginning of your broadcast about Russian collusion. I think that's all fake news, only because in the past you was talking about gerrymandering, you was talking about interstate cross-check. That's the real reason why Democrats lost the election. And there really hasn't been any proof of Russian collusion other than these so-called bots. But again, I don't think you're really staying active.
Well, there's two issues here, John. One is the collusion, and the other is whether the Russians actually influenced the election. This book that was published 2 weeks ago lays out a 300-page summary, essentially, of how the Russians influenced the elections and how without the Russians participating in our elections, and this is just the Facebook stuff and the collaboration with WikiLeaks and the hacking Hillary Clinton's emails. If the Russians had not done that, Hillary Clinton would be president right now. There's no doubt about that, number one. And number two, collusion requires somebody on both sides, somebody inside the campaign and somebody inside Russia, talking to each other and working with each other. Michael Flynn has already pled guilty to that. Papadopoulos pled guilty to that. Paul Manafort pled guilty to that. And Michael Cohen has pled guilty to that. So where is this lack of proof that the Trump campaign was colluding with Russia?
Tom, you know how many elections the United States interfered with around the world?
That, is trying to come up with a false equivalence is not denying my facts.
It's not a false equivalence. I just think you're wrong about that, Tom. I mean, just recently.
Wait a minute. I'm wrong that Michael Flynn pled guilty to colluding with the Russians?
Tom.
Am I wrong that Paul Manafort pled guilty to colluding with the Russians?
Okay.
Am I wrong that Papadopoulos pled guilty to colluding with the Russians?
Even though they came out with it, I don't believe it. And on top of that, they're blaming Russia now.
Am I wrong that when Manafort was running the Republican Party during the convention, that they actually changed the language in the Republican platform to say that we should be nicer to the Russians? What am I wrong about here? I don't get it.
You're contradicting yourself, Tom. You're talking about gerrymandering and interstate cross-check. What about that? How come the Democrats never talk about that?
Well, I'd like them to talk about it more, frankly, John. But, this idea that the Russians didn't have anything to do with this is crazy. Irene in Jacksonville, North Carolina. Hey, Irene, what's on your mind?
Oh, I just wanted to comment regarding the gentleman who called earlier and asked why Dianne Feinstein still is with Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was not a sexual predator. He was promiscuous, yes. And like a lot of other presidents before him, he acted in unpresidential ways, but that was his private life, and it should have never come to the surface. Monica Lewinsky has always said that it was a consensual adult relationship, now with the Me Too movement and everything, she's got the perfect out to say, well, no, I was very young and vulnerable.
No, I agree. And I know that there, Juanita Broaddrick is probably the most credible, but there are, 2 women who have accused Clinton of rape, but that has never been proven or demonstrated and, may well not be the case. But even his promiscuity is problematic for the Democrats right now. And, but, I agree with your point, Irene, and I think this is why he's still respected and he's still inside the Democratic Party. But increasingly, Democrats are uncomfortable with Bill Clinton around, and I understand why, don't you?
Well, I guess time will tell, because John Fitzgerald Kennedy was way worse than Bill Clinton ever was.
Sure. Sure.
And
Franklin Roosevelt had a mistress. Dwight Eisenhower had a mistress. Lyndon Johnson had a mistress. I mean,
George H.W. Bush.
Yep, he had a mistress.
They're blind.
Yep.
But after time passes, they're held up just as Thomas Jefferson is now, as being
who raped his slave. Yeah. No, I get it. I get it. And time passes, and our perspectives change. I just. This isn't a generational thing, Irene. It's fascinating to watch. Thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
There was a new poll out from Public Affairs Council and Morning Consult. And what this poll found was that while the news media is trusted as a primary source for what's going on, 46% of Americans say they trust the news media, 71% of Americans said that they trust their friends and neighbors as a source of media more than the news media, 71%. Now, what that means is that you, as a Free Speech TV viewer, are well informed on what's going on, far more so than the average person. So you have an opportunity now to be the news source for your friends, your neighbors, your family, whether it's on Facebook or talking to people at the store or your next door neighbors or whatever it may be. And you have an opportunity to let them know about this great news source here. Free Speech TV. Tell them how they can find it. You can go to freespeech.org. You can find all the places where people can watch Free Speech TV. Thank you. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Settlers, The Mythology of the White Proletariat, The True Story of the White Nation by Jay Sakai, published by Morningstar Press in 1989. This is from Chapter 2, The Foundations of Settler Life. The life of European settlers and the class structure of their society was abnormal because it was dependent upon a foundation of conquest, genocide, and enslavement. The myth of the self-sufficient white settler family clearing the wilderness and supporting themselves through their own initiative and hard labor is a propaganda fabrication. It is the absolute characteristic of settler society to be parasitic, dependent upon the super-exploitation of oppressed peoples for its style of life. Never has Euro-American society completely supported itself. This is the decisive factor in the consciousness of all classes and strata of white society from 1600 to now. Settler society was raised up above the level of backward old Europe by a foundation of conquest. This conquest was a miracle drug for a Europe convulsed with the reaction of decaying feudalism and deadly capitalism. Shot into the veins of the Spanish feudal nation, for instance, the miracle drug of the New World conquest
gave Spain the momentary power to overrun North Africa, Holland, and Italy before her historical incident waned. Like many such fixes for Euro-Americans, this conquest was addicting. It was habit-forming and rapidly indispensable, not only culturally, but in the mechanism of an oppressor society whose lifeblood was new conquest. We'll examine this later in the relationship of settlerism to imperialism. For now, it's enough to see that this conquest is a material act of great magnitude, an economic and social event as important as the emergence of the factory system or the exploitation of petroleum in the Middle East. We stress the obvious here because the Euro-American settlers have always made light of their invasion and occupation, although the conquered territory is the precondition for their whole society. Traditionally, European settler societies throw off the propaganda smoke screens that they didn't really conquer and dispossess other nations. They claim with false modesty that they merely moved into vacant territory. So the early English settlers depicted America as empty, a howling wilderness, unsettled, sparsely populated, just waiting with a vacant sign on the door for the first lucky civilization to walk in and claim it. Theodore Roosevelt wrote defensively in 1900, quote, "The settler and pioneer have at bottom had justice on their side. This great continent could not have been kept as nothing but a game preserve for squalid savages," end of quote. It is telling that this lie is precisely the same lie put forward by white Afrikaner settlers who claim that South Africa was literally totally uninhabited by any Africans when they arrived from Europe. To universal derision, these European settlers claim to be the only rightful historic inhabitants of South Africa. Or we can hear similar defenses put forward by the European settlers of Israel, who claim that much of the Palestinian land and buildings they occupy are rightfully theirs, since the Arabs had allegedly decided to voluntarily abandon it all during the 1948-49 war. Are these kinds of tales any less preposterous than those put forward by Euro-American settlers? America was spacious and sparsely populated only because the European invaders destroyed whole civilizations and killed off millions of Native Americans to get the land and profits they wanted. We all know that when the English arrived at Virginia, for example, they encountered an urban, village-dwelling society far more skilled than they were in the arts of medicine, agriculture, fishing, and government. This civilization was reflected in a chain of 300 Indian nations and peoples stretching from the Arctic Circle to the tip of South America, many of whom had highly developed societies. There was, in fact, a greater population in these Indian nations in 1492 than in all of Western Europe. Recent scholarly estimates indicate that at the time of Columbus, there were 100 million Indians in the hemisphere, 10 million in North America, 25 million in Central Mexico, and an additional 65 million elsewhere in Central and South America. These numbers have long been concealed since they give rise to the logical question of what happened to this great mass of people. The European invaders, Spanish, Dutch, English, Portuguese, and French, simply killed off millions and millions to safeguard their conquest of the land and provide the disposable slave labor they needed to launch their new world. Conservative Western historical estimates show that the Spanish reduced, in quotes, the Indian population of their colonies from some 50 million to only 4 million by the end of the 17th century. And from the 10 million Indians who once inhabited North America, after 4 centuries of settler invasion and rule, there were in 1900 perhaps 200,000 to 300,000 surviving descendants in the United States. This was the very substantial down payment towards the continuing blood price that third world nations have to pay to sustain the Euro-American way of life. So when we hear that the settlers pushed out the Indians or forced the Indians to leave their traditional hunting grounds, we know that these are just code phrases to refer politely to the most barbaric genocide imaginable. It could well be the greatest crime in all of human history. Only here, the Adolf Eichmanns and Heinrich Himmlers had names like Benjamin Franklin and Andrew Jackson. The point is that genocide was not an accident, not an excess, not the unintended side effect of virile European growth. Genocide was the necessary and deliberate act of the capitalists and their settler shock troops. The book Settlers.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Wow. Okay. In the past hour, just to catch you up, we were talking about it's Columbus Day. We don't even bother to attend to the old slave trader much anymore. And I really think the Democrats need to stop beating ourselves up, and being all hand-wringy and despairy, like, oh, Kavanaugh. I mean, the Kavanaugh deal. It's frankly amazing that it was a one-vote margin, right? I mean, it really is. It's just amazing it was a one-vote margin. That I think is a victory, frankly, and it has activated women all over the country. But the Kavanaugh nomination was a done deal the day that Donald Trump, was declared the winner of the Electoral College. The day that he lost by 3 million popular votes, but the old slave Electoral College put him into office, just like it put George W. Bush into office. I mean, that's really the message here. I mean, in '91, when Clarence Thomas, disputed Anita Hill's testimony, a lot of women got into politics the next year in '92. And who was elected to politics? Patty Murray from Washington State, Dianne Feinstein from California, who are still in the Senate. And meanwhile, Donald Trump is being investigated by the state of New York for literally ripping off widows in their housing by skimming money, by creating this phony company to skim money out of his father's estate and stick the bill with the people who were in the rent-controlled apartments that his father owned by jacking up the rent-controlled rates because they could say, oh, look at our expenses went up. I mean, Trump is being investigated. Mueller is out there. He's already got, 30 indictments, 6, 7, 8, something like that, guilty pleas. But what's going on here is much larger than just Brett Kavanaugh. What's going on is much larger than just the Republican Party. This is a multi-generation effort that was started in 1971 when Lewis Powell wrote this memo for his friend and neighbor Eugene Sindor, who ran the education, vice president of education or something like that, for the Chamber of Commerce, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And Lewis Powell said, we need to get the Supreme Court, among other things, right? We need to create think tanks to influence public opinion, thus the Heritage Foundation, Cato, American Enterprise Institute, Competitive Enterprise Institute, et cetera. All those things came out of that. We need to get business in bed with a political party, in this case, the Republican Party. Thus, you had ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, sponsoring legislation, and Republican legislators in every state, all 50 states. And now there is a town and county version of this that the Koch brothers have funded. I mean, Lewis Powell just laid it all out, and this is what's going on. This is a multi-generational power play to cement the power of wealth in this country, and by and large, the power of whiteness in this country. I would argue at the stratified levels, it's more about wealth. On the street, it's more about whiteness. And so, it's arguably a class war. And it's all about preserving the power of wealthy, entitled white men. It's just that simple. And these guys have been going about this for a long, long time. And now their sales pitch is, and this is Kavanaugh says this, Clarence Thomas was one of the first to say this, Scalia said this, Alito said this, John Roberts said this, that they are, quote, originalists. What does that mean? Oh, we interpret the original meaning of the Constitution. Well, who wrote the Constitution? About half the people in that room were wealthy white slaveholders. And all of the people in that room agreed that, well, I was going to say that women shouldn't vote. There actually was a debate about that, and they tabled the debate. And they chose not to put anything about women into the Constitution. In fact, the first time the word man or men was inserted into the Constitution was the 14th Amendment. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton said, if that word male is inserted into the into the 14th Amendment, into the Constitution. It'll take 100 years to get it out. And it literally was 100 years from the time the 14th Amendment was ratified until the first equal rights legislation was passed by the U.S. Congress. But basically, I mean, do you get this? These guys are saying, we're originalists. We want to interpret the Constitution the way a wealthy white slave owner would. This is Clarence Thomas's sales pitch to you. This is, and this is why they're going after the visa program, the lottery program, because, hey, it brings in people from Africa. This is why they want to change our immigration laws, because, hey, we want more white people from Europe. Trump himself, we want more Norwegians. This is what voter suppression is all about, with interstate cross-check suppressing the votes of Hispanics, African Americans, and Asians. This is what Citizens United was all about. It's what their call for a constitutional convention is all about. And in the meantime, we've got this bizarre situation where the President of the United States is lying to us, lying through his teeth. This is video 1, Nate. First, he starts out lying, I mean, literally making this up. Democrats don't want open borders. We want a country where, you know, the United States is sovereign. In fact, Democrats, it's been libertarians for years who have argued for open borders. This is an old libertarian thing. It comes from the objectivists, from Ayn Rand. They say capital, money can move across borders, goods can move across borders, people should be able to move across borders so that labor can go wherever labor is needed for the benefit of industry. This is libertarian all the way, which is the Republicans. So this is the old Ron Paul shtick, right? He was like, if we didn't have welfare programs, I'd be totally in favor of open borders. Look it up. You can find all kinds of YouTubes. Ron Paul saying, and Rand Paul, for that matter, his own son, saying the same thing. But Donald Trump says, no, it's the Democrats who are thinking like this. Here he is.
Every single Democrat in the U.S. Senate has signed up for the open borders, and it's a bill. It's called the Open Borders Bill. What's going on? And it's written by, guess who? Dianne Feinstein.
Donald Trump last night, and it's a complete lie. I mean, literally, there is absolutely no truth to it whatsoever. Now, this is like the 15th or 20th time that he's gone out there and pitched the Democrats want open borders. It's one of his constant refrains. It is a lie. It is an absolute, utter, blatant lie. Why is the media not pointing this out? Can you imagine if Barack Obama had come out and said that the Republicans are you know, in favor of, I don't know, something, you know, equally bizarre? You know, it's breathtaking. Video 2 here, this is Donald Trump talking about how Democrats are going to bring a tidal wave of drugs and crime. In other words, you know, this is piggybacking on his lie about open borders. In other words, they're going to let brown people into this country from Mexico, which, again, Democrats have always been saying, you know, let's have rational immigration policies, but we don't want an open border. What, are you crazy? Here's Trump lying about this.
If the Democrats' bill ever becomes law, a tidal wave of drugs and crime would pour into our nation like never, ever before.
And then he says, and not only that, the Democrats want to give free health care to all these people that once the Democrats open the border are going to pour in. Another lie, an absolute lie. In fact, the law says if you're not a citizen, you can't get government assistance. You can't get this help. But anyhow, here's Donald Trump lying through his teeth again.
Democrats are also fighting to give welfare and free health care to illegal aliens, paid for by you, the American taxpayer. Thank you very much.
Right. And here he is saying that the social safety net, Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, which his Republican Party is working to destroy, and he's lying about, saying that, oh, that's just for America. Well, of course it's for Americans here. This is why, you know, one of the things about Social Security is it's being kept afloat by all these people in the United States who are not citizens paying into it, but then they can't get the benefit from it. So it's like it's a multi-billion-dollar a year freebie for Social Security, but Trump lies about that, too. Here he is.
Republicans believe that the public benefits must be protected for the truly needy Americans. Americans that need help. not illegal aliens.
This is just a complete lie. This is Donald Trump lying through his teeth. I mean, it probably shouldn't surprise us that Donald Trump lies through his teeth. He brags about how he lies through his teeth in his own book, Art of the Deal. He has a long history of lying through his teeth, including calling up reporters and pretending to be John Barron. I mean, he just... I'm astonished that the media is not going nuts with this. I'm just astonished.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Have we become so used to this man lying that we now just take it for granted? We just now shrug our shoulders? Has it become completely normalized? And welcome back. Picking up your phone calls here. Laura in Champaign, Illinois. Hey, Laura, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I follow politics pretty closely, and I'm aware of several think tanks for the Republicans, but I have never heard of any for the Democrats. Do you know of any think tanks that are supporting the Democrats?
There are some nonpartisan think tanks, Roosevelt, Pew, there's a couple of those, although they tend to be more, just kind of public policy think tanks. I don't know of any that are explicitly partisan the way that the Republicans are. But that may be because the Republican think tanks, they all came out of the 71 Powell memo, and he encouraged the billionaires to fund them. Jane Mayer wrote a whole book about this called Dark Money. And that's exactly what they did. They funded them like crazy.
Do you know why that this is the case? I mean,
it's because there are not multi-billionaire Democratic donors who are willing to put large chunks of their fortune into think tanks. The Republicans do it because, tax cuts. Right? I mean, I guarantee you every penny the Koch brothers have invested in the Republican Party has been repaid to them probably 5 or 10-fold over the years in the form of tax cuts and deregulation. So their investing in think tanks is a way of increasing their wealth. On the other hand, if a Democrat billionaire, if George Soros puts money into a think tank, and his think tank, the Open Market Institute, is more about, international relations and things like that. But if he puts money into a think tank and it produces more Democratic members of Congress, they're going to raise his taxes too. And so, there's no financial incentive for anyone, left or right, to invest in Democratic Party think tanks. There's only a moral incentive, and the moral incentive does not seem to be strong enough to stimulate the people who might be inclined to support the Democrats, who are billionaires, and I'm not sure how many there are out there, but the mega billionaires, the Jeff Bezos and Warren Buffetts and Bill Gateses of the world, they're all trying to stay above the political fray. So, to the best of my knowledge, nobody's funding those things. Laura.
Well, I didn't think that it was. They were funding through dark money, and that was the only way these think tanks are. That's the only way they operate.
No, they some of them are funded with right up front donations. You can look up their donors. They file IRS forms. They're 501c3s, the one that are actual think tanks. You can see who gave money to them and who didn't. But I would love to call for like Lewis Powell did, call for wealthy Democrats to fund some of these programs. But the sad reality is they tend not to. The organization of wealthy Democrats is called the Democracy Alliance. There's this group that gets together twice a year. The next meeting's in D.C. in November. And, they, in order to be a member, you've got to contribute a couple $100,000, I believe it is, to certified causes, essentially, by the Democracy Alliance. But it is such a drop in the bucket compared to what the Republicans are up to. It's unfortunate. It's almost sad. Laura, thank you for the call. It's a really, really good question and a really good point. It's 21 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. There was a new poll out from Public Affairs Council and Morning Consult. And what this poll found was that while the news media is trusted as a primary source for what's going on, 46% of Americans say they trust the news media, 71% of Americans said that they trust their friends and neighbors as a source of media more than the news media, 71%. Now, what that means is that you, as a Free Speech TV viewer, are well informed on what's going on, far more so than the average person. So you have an opportunity now to be the news source for your friends, your neighbors, your family, whether it's on Facebook or talking to people at the store or your next door neighbors or whatever it may be. And you have an opportunity to let them know about this great news source here, Free Speech TV. Tell them how they can find it. You can go to freespeech.org. You can find all the places where people can watch Free Speech TV. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Bob in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, says you want to disagree with me, Bob. What about? Is it all about hemp? Bob? Oh, that's odd. Usually Bob's on the phone. Okay, let's try Adam in Temecula, California. Hey, Adam, what's on your mind?
Before I get to my comment, I want to mention that while I was on hold, I became one of your Patreons.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yes, I appreciate you, and I mentioned that I appreciate your passion, demeanor, and expertise and all that.
Well, thank you. We also record a little, typically it's around somewhere between 3 and 7 minute rant every week, a video rant that is private on YouTube, and it's only available to people who subscribe to our YouTube channel or who watch us on, or who are subscribers on Patreon, and or who have supported our YouTube channel. So you'll have access to that now too, and you know it's typically a pretty good rant. What's up, Adam?
Well, first of all, I do want to mention as a segue of sorts that I am on service-connected disability with the VA.
Uh-huh.
And so, yeah, I do get anxiety, and sometimes I get anxiety if I should, I don't know, call into a radio program. Anyway, but I intend to enter the workforce pretty soon. I know if that's a good or bad thing. Hence, here's the segue and my comment. I'm concerned that along with the confirmation this weekend that 45, I do not mention him by name, is further gloating from the announced lowest unemployment rate in almost 50 years. And MSNBC even mentioned that Republicans are claiming to be getting sick of winning. So they're making themselves out to be heroes. Right. With a month ago before the blue wave. But I suspect a hidden agenda such as forthcoming higher interest rates and an increase in the cost of living or through the roof inflation. So I just want to check to see if you have similar suspicions and have any reassuring words of wisdom that the red wave is not going to gain momentum. Yeah,
I'll give you two. And this is what I really think is happening. I'm going to sneeze here. Excuse me. If the Republicans can prevent this economy from crashing before November, and I think the probabilities are very high that they will do so, by just continually pouring money into the economy. And if the Democrats take the House of Representatives in November, I predict that the Republicans will loosen or weaken their support for the economy immediately after that victory and let the economy go into free fall for a few months and say, see, the market has its own intelligence. Democrats just took control of the House of Representatives and the market is crashing. It's all the Democrats' fault. Prediction number one. Prediction number two, if Trump can keep this thing going until November of 2020, he will probably get reelected, or I won't say almost certainly, but I think it's a better than 50% chance. Or even if, and this is what happened in 2008 or 2006, if 2008, pardon me, if George W. Bush, if that crash, they had been trying to hold that crash off for the last year and a half in 2005 and 2006 and 2007. I mean, they knew that it was coming. They saw it coming. Everybody knew this thing was coming. And, well, not everybody, but a lot of people knew this thing was coming. And certainly in the Bush White House, they knew it was coming.
They were trying to hold it off until after the November election, because they figured if the crash happened before the election, people will elect a Democrat. And sure enough, they did. And, you know, and John McCain was having a terrible time running on a bad economy that the Republicans brought us. So the timing of the end of this expansion period, to use the most clinical language I can come up with, the timing of that is going to be critical to whether Republicans can exploit it against Democrats or use it for their own benefit. And they know this. And they are working very, very diligently to be able to do this. So those are my thoughts on that, Adam. I think I didn't answer your question, though. Or did I?
Well, I think it's within reason, because do you think that people are going to be gullible enough to be swayed to believe that they are benefiting from this report of the low unemployment rate?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, that's what's happening right now. You know, every time the economy gets a little bit better, the support for Trump gets a little more solid. The economy is the biggest predictor. If you look at elections going all the way back to the early 1800s, the biggest predictor of which party is going to end up in the White House is the economy.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. In the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from American Holocaust by David Stannard, The Conquest of the New World. This is from the prologue. Just 21 years after Columbus's first landing in the Caribbean, the vastly populous island that the explorer had renamed Hispaniola was effectively desolate. Nearly 8 million people, those Columbus chose to call Indians, had been killed by violence, disease, and despair. It took a little longer, about the span of a single human generation, but what happened on Hispaniola was the equivalent of more than 50 Hiroshimas, and Hispaniola was only the beginning. Within no more than a handful of generations following their first encounters with Europeans, the vast majority of the Western Hemisphere's native peoples had been exterminated. The pace and magnitude of their obliteration varied from place to place and from time to time, but for years, now historical demographers have been uncovering in region upon region post-Columbia depopulation rates of between 90 and 98%, with such regularity that an overall decline of 95% in Native American population has become a working rule of thumb. What this means is that, on average, for every 20 natives alive at the moment of European contact, when the lands of the Americans teemed with numerous tens of millions of people, only one stood in their place when the bloodbath was over. To put this in a contemporary context, the ratio of native survivorship in the Americas following European contact was less than half of what the human survivorship ratio would be in the United States today if every single white person and every single black person died. The destruction of the Indians of the Americas was far and away the most massive act of genocide in the history of the world. That is why, as one historian aptly has said, far from the heroic and romantic heraldry that customarily is used to symbolize the European settlement of the Americas, the emblem most congruent with reality would be a pyramid of skulls. Scholars estimate the size of the post-Columbian Holocaust have climbed sharply in recent decades. Too often, however, academic discussions of this ghastly event have reduced the devastated indigenous people and their cultures to statistical calculations in reconciling demographic analyses. It was easy for this to happen. From the very beginning, merely taking the account of so mammoth a cataclysm seemed an impossible task, wrote one Spanish adventurer who arrived in the New World only 2 decades after Columbus's first landing, and who himself openly reveled in the torrent of native blood. There was neither, quote, paper nor time enough to tell all that the conquistadors did to ruin the Indians and rob them and destroy the land, end quote. As a result, the very effort to describe the disaster's overwhelming magnitude has tended to obliterate
both the writer's and the reader's sense of its truly horrific human element. In an apparent effort to contradict or counteract this tendency, one writer, Tsvetsan Todorov, began his study of the events of 1492 and immediately thereafter with an epigraph from Diego de Landa's Relación de las Casas de Yucatán. Quote, "The captain, Alonso Lopez de Avila, brother-in-law of the Adelmento de Montejo, captured during the war in Bacalan a young Indian woman of lovely and gracious appearance. She had promised her husband, fearful lest they should kill him in the war, not to have relations with any other man but him, and so no persuasion was sufficient to prevent her from taking her own life to avoid being defiled by another man. And because of this, they had her thrown to the dogs." Toborov then dedicates his book to the memory of a Mayan woman devoured by dogs. It is important to try and hold in mind an image of that woman and her brothers and sisters and the innumerable others who suffered similar fates as one reads Todorov's book, or this one, or any other work on this subject. Just as it is essential, as one reads about the Jewish Holocaust or the horrors of the African slave trade, to keep in mind the treasure of a single life in order to avoid becoming emotionally anesthetized by the sheer force of such overwhelming human evil and destruction. There is, for example, a case of a small Indian boy whose name no one knows today, and whose unmarked skeletal remains are hopelessly intermingled with those of hundreds of anonymous others in a mass grave on the American plains, but a boy who once played on the banks of a quiet creek in eastern Colorado, until the morning in 1864, when the American soldiers came. Then, as one of the cavalrymen later told it, while his compatriots were slaughtering and mutilating the bodies of all the women and all of the children they could catch, he spotted the boy trying to flee. Quote, "There was one child, probably 3 years old, just big enough to walk through the sand. The Indians had gone ahead and this little child was behind following after them. The little fellow was perfectly naked, traveling on the sand. I saw one man get off his horse at a distance of about 75 yards and drop his rifle and fire, but he missed the child. Another man came up and said, 'Let me try the son of a bitch, I can hit him.' He got down off his horse, kneeled down and fired at the little child, but he missed him too. A third man came up and made a similar remark and fired, and the little fellow dropped." We must do what we can to recapture and try to understand in human terms what it was that was crushed, what it was that was butchered. It is not enough merely to acknowledge that much was lost. So close to total was the human incineration and carnage. And it continues. All aboard! It's a once-in-a-lifetime luxury Alaskan cruise on the Regent Seven Seas Mariner, July 24th, 2019. For more information, Keen Luxury Travel, 800-856-1155. And did I mention we'll be getting active on board with special events with yours truly, me and Louise, as we visit Ketchikan, Juneau, Skagway, Sitka, Hubbard Glacier, and Anchorage. Special events.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Bulgarian investigative journalist Victoria Marinova was found raped and murdered after she did a television program exposing corruption of the Bulgarian government. She's the fourth journalist now murdered in the European Union last year. This is what happens when you start saying that the press is the enemy of the people. This is what happens. It's amazing. Terry in Richmond, Virginia. Hey, Terry, what's up?
Hey, Tom. A thought about the Kavanaugh thing. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you can answer this or maybe somebody else can. If a Supreme Court justice is accused of perjury, can they be indicted for it? And if they're convicted for it, are they automatically removed from the Supreme Court?
They are not automatically removed from the Supreme Court if they're convicted of anything. There's no provision to that effect in the Constitution. They could be indicted, but it would have to be in a what do you call it? A whatever that has jurisdiction, whether it would be a federal court or a state court. And
you know, in the case of Bill Clinton, he had a suspension, a one-year suspension of his law license by the Arkansas Bar. And so the individual bar association can suspend, you know, the individual state bar associations can suspend your law license. I think that the thing that Kavanaugh has to fear is that if the Democrats launched an investigation into his lies, into whether he lied about these sexual assaults and the extent of his drinking and his lies and what are now fairly clear lies about his involvement with the Bush administration in torture and we don't even know what else. I mean, you know, all an entire 3-year period of his time working as a hatchet man. I mean, this guy was he was never a lawyer. He was a right-wing hatchet man, whether it was for Ken Starr, whether it was for George W. Bush. He didn't work as a, you know, you could say he worked as a lawyer and that he was giving legal advice, but he was not, you know, trying cases in courts of law and things like that. And he went from being a right-wing hatchet man right to the D.C. Circuit. And then he's going from the D.C. Circuit. He went directly from the D.C. Circuit to the Supreme Court. So you now have a guy in the Supreme Court who's never argued a case before the Supreme Court. In fact, to the best of my knowledge, now maybe early on in his career, like in his first year out of law school or something, but to the best of my knowledge, he's never certainly argued a consequential case before any court at all. And, you know, he's just been a right-wing hitman. And so the thing that he has to fear is impeachment. The impeachment provision of the Constitution applies to all federal officers. That includes federal judges. That includes members of the U.S. Supreme Court. And in fact, one member of the U.S. Supreme Court, Mr. Chase, back in 1806 or something, was impeached in the House of Representatives. They did not convict him in the Senate. So that's the thing that he has to fear. And it would take 66 votes in the Senate to make that stick. So I don't think he has a lot to fear around that. Terry, thanks a lot for the call. May in Annandale, Virginia. Hey, May, what's up?
Hi. I wanted to mention that I believe this when you were talking about the intolerable, consistent lies that are coming out of the president. I believe the method is called fire hosing, and I think it's also used by Putin, coincidentally.
Yeah.
But
well, probably it's used by every strong man all around the world.
Apparently so. It's a manner of obliterating the foundation of the truth so that their truths can be superimposed over top of that. And, of course, you see in the massive confusion, no one knows what to believe. And it's a very, very sad thing because especially, you know, the dishonoring of the office itself. But as you were mentioning about trusting each other as neighbors and news, and I presume that also goes with your relationship with us, that we have the responsibility of trying to find good resources that we know that we can trust, that are truthful, and to, you know, check those things often and share it with those that we know that we can share that with. And I really appreciate your time and mentioning all these things to us that you find.
My pleasure. There is by the way, somebody called earlier and said, is there a website that lists all of the candidates and what they have voted for and what their status is and all that?
Yes, I wanted that website.
Yeah, several people tweeted to me, votesmart.org. Now, this is not a site I'm familiar with, and I haven't had a chance to check it out. It's apparently funded by one guy who's got a video of himself on the front page. I don't know what his politics are. I don't know how accurate it is. But there have been a number of people who have tweeted it to me here since we started the show. So
it's absolutely necessary because in the midst of what I consider a corporate coup, you know, they found they can play both sides.
Right.
And when that happens, you know, who do you vote for? Who do you trust? Who do you believe? And I honestly believe that also that, you know, see what they do, not what they say.
Well, and this is the reason.
That would be a good example.
Yeah, and this is the reason, May, why we have seen voter participation go from, you know, as high as 60-70% back in the 19th century down to 30, you know, 30 in the 30s during congressional midterm elections here in the United States, is because for a lot of people, they're looking at a corporate Republican versus a corporate Democrat, and they're shrugging their shoulders. And yeah, there are even then differences. I mean, Heidi Heitkamp is still a hell of a lot better than any Republican. Joe Manchin, for that matter, is a hell of a lot better than any Republican. But, you know, a lot of people are saying, you know, the differences are not great enough to get me off my butt. And that's why the parties need to get their people out. May, thank you for that, and the fire hosing thing. And once again, that website is called votesmart.org. And again, I'm going to look at it when I get off the air. I won't have time until then, but it looks like it might have what people are asking about. Heather in Taos, New Mexico. Hey, Heather, what's on your mind today?
Yes, I've been asking this question around to my friends, and I haven't gotten an answer. What, in regards to the FBI investigation on Kavanaugh, what would happen if the Democrats did say what was really in that investigation? Apparently their hands are tied, their mouths are shut, it's under lock and key. And what would happen if one of them did say what they saw?
I'm guessing since the FBI only interviewed 9 people, I believe it was, and all of them said essentially, I don't know, I don't want to get involved, I don't remember anything. That there's nothing there that is juicy enough to bother leaking, which is why it hasn't leaked. What we need is an actual investigation where the FBI doesn't have handcuffs put on by Don McGahn and Donald Trump. Now, another thing that Donald Trump lied to us all about, and you know, actually looks into this. And frankly, if the FBI can't do it because the White House prevented them, if the Democrats take the House of Representatives, Ted Lieu has already promised, and he just tweeted about this again yesterday, that he is going to make sure that there is an investigation into Brett Kavanaugh's lies before the United States House of Representatives, and they will have the power to subpoena people, to compel their testimony, and do it under oath. So, you know, it's going to get interesting, Heather. It's going to get real interesting. And thank you for the call. This Kavanaugh nomination, this is not the end of something. This is the beginning of something. This is the beginning of I think, what's going to be a political explosion in this country, particularly when the Supreme Court starts handing down hardcore right-wing decisions. You know, hang on to your seats. Richard in Seattle. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind today?
Well, you covered part of it when you mentioned the Powell Memorandum. I mean, that was really the blueprint for where we are.
Yep.
However, I'm of the opinion that the John M. Olin Foundation had to do a lot with the function, with how we got here in terms of funding it.
Oh, they were one of the major funders that came in after they were exposed to Powell's memo, presumably.
Exactly. Well, there is a book called The Gift of Freedom, How the John M. Olin Foundation Changed America by John J. Miller, which you might find interesting. But what I put together as I was listening to your program was this, the law and economics movement. They were a major mover in that. And you asked after part of your commentary, you're astounded that the press isn't doing more with this. Well, look at who controls the press.
Yeah, 6 corporations basically control the entire media in the United States.
You have MSNBC regularly brings on the bobblehead Hillary. And recently there was Debbie Wasserman Schultz as a representative. And of course you have
you know, Hillary Clinton ran for president. She deserves to be in the media. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, I obviously have problems with, but the problem with MSNBC is not you know who they're bringing on as guests in that capacity. The problem is the things that they won't let their people on the air talk about. MSNBC is owned by Comcast. Comcast makes their money selling internet to people. And they'll make a hell of a lot more money if net neutrality is destroyed. And that's why you're not seeing much discussion about it at all on MSNBC, among other things.
Here in Washington, they're talking about the blue wave.
Right.
Well, I come from California. That's a surfing term. And to me, it's the heads of the Democratic Party riding the surfboards on the tears of the proletariat, the disadvantaged, the blacks, the females, etc.
Yeah. Well, you know, you could have made that argument, I think, in the 90s, but I'm not buying it anymore, Richard. The Congressional Progressive Caucus is now the largest caucus in the Democratic Party, the largest. To the best of my knowledge, they don't have a single Republican member because there are no longer any progressive Republicans. Teddy Roosevelt is dead, and his part of the Republican Party, William Taft, Howard Taft's, dead.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're going to check in with Talk Media News in about 4 minutes, find out what's going on in the world today. It is 45 minutes, 36 seconds past the hour. And welcome back. Travis in El Dorado, Illinois, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Travis, you wanted to talk about Jeff Flake?
Yeah, I did. That's just kind of my theory. I don't know how accurate it is, but it kind of pertains to Jeff Flake's future after he retires, I guess, from Congress. What I was thinking is the reason why he decided to vote yes on this, Kavanaugh clown was because he's setting himself up to, either be a lobbyist for the Conservatard Party after he retires or work for a, Conservatard think tank. What do you think about that?
I agree. It's an interesting phrase, Conservatard. But yeah, I agree with you, Travis. He's feathering his own nest. If Jeff Flake was operating out of principle, you could tell from his body language he felt terrible about what he was doing. But hey, he wants to make millions of dollars and make sure that his kids and grandkids are well taken care of. And this is what he thinks he has to do. Yeah, I completely agree with you. Travis, thanks a lot for the call. And I wish that he had some courage, but obviously he doesn't. Kathy in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Kathy, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Hi, Tom. You were talking earlier about the composition of the Supreme Court. Right. And I think it's important that people understand that the Judiciary Act of 1869 set the justices at 9, including a Chief Justice. Right. And in fact, there is no option to have anything less or more than that. The language is very specific, and it says that, and this is just an excerpt from the act, I won't read the whole thing, the Supreme Court of the United States shall hereafter consist of the Chief Justice of the United States and 8 associate justices. Right. So what happened here is that the Democrats could have sued on the basis of violation of that Act of 1869. And the Constitution does grant the Senate to, make its own rules, but they can't do it out of reason. They can't do it in violation of the law, which clearly they did in this case. And I was very frustrated knowing about this act that the Democrats didn't pursue some type of legal action. A couple
of problems with that. Number one, the Judiciary Act of 1869 was the legislation I was talking about in the last hour that was passed after Ulysses S. Grant became president, so they could re-expand the Supreme Court. They took it from 10 down to as I recall, 6 after when Andrew Johnson became president. It is not a constitutional amendment, so it can be overwritten by any Congress. Any Congress can simply say, we're replacing the Judiciary Act of 1869 with a new one, number one. Number two, it hasn't been, the Supreme Court has never ruled on whether, it's like, well, actually, I don't think that they would have to. But, I don't see where the Democrats could have sued. You're talking about the Merrick Garland thing, right?
Yes, exactly, because we're talking about a situation where ultimately that position, after the death of Scalia wasn't filled for like over 400 days. Right, but it was, and those positions have been open historically for almost that long on a number of occasions. It took Reagan quite a while, for example, to go through Bork and then Ginsburg and finally get to Kennedy. I don't recall how long, but it took a long time. But I don't think that they would have prevailed in a lawsuit on that. I don't think it would have worked. But I would have loved to have seen them try. I mean, your point, it could have been used for publicity, if nothing else. Kathy, thanks for the call. Not a lot of people even know about the Judiciary Act of 1869. I'm impressed. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. It's 10 minutes before the hour. There was a new poll out from Public Affairs Council and Morning Consult. And what this poll found was that while the news media is trusted as a primary source for what's going on, 46% of Americans say they trust the news media, 71% of Americans said that they trust their friends and neighbors as a source of media more than the news media, 71%. Now, what that means is that you, as a Free Speech TV viewer, are well informed on what's going on, far more so than the average person. So you have an opportunity now to be the news source for your friends, your neighbors, your family, whether it's on Facebook or talking to people at the store or your next door neighbors or whatever it may be. And you have an opportunity to let them know about this great news source here.
Free Speech TV. Tell them how they can find it. You can go to freespeech.org. You can find all the places where people can watch Free Speech TV. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Here with you. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do. On the line with us is the author of Sideswiped, former Republican congressman from Ohio, Bob Ney. Bob, welcome back. Hello?
Yes, hello.
Hi.
Yes, thank you. How are you?
I am well. It's always nice talking with you, Bob. What's going on in the world today?
Well, I won't get into Kavanaugh. If you have some questions, I know you've probably been talking about it, but I'll give you a few other pieces of news, and glad to pontificate if you want me to on Kavanaugh. So I just wanted to go to a couple of stories. A strange story week. First of all, the head of Interpol, who vanished after he took a flight to China, we now find is being held for corruption in China, and his name is Meng Hongwei. And he was also Vice Minister of Public Security in China. I think at one point in time there was denial that that they had him, but now he is there. Now they don't relate the corruption to Interpol, but they relate corruption internally. And it's sort of denial week because the Saudis, the big controversy, of course, in Turkey is the Saudis denying that they have supposedly hacked to death Jamal Khashoggi, who is a Washington Post contributor. And, of course, he's a frequent critic of the Saudi government.
And it looks like he was murdered. His fiancée was waiting outside the embassy for him. Waited 2 days. He never came back out.
And she said he didn't come back out. Now, here's a point, too. The Saudis let some media in to look around, quote, which is a farce. And, if the Saudis said he exited right away after he got a fiancé visa, that's pretty easy because everything is recorded in the embassies of the exits and entrance. But they won't produce that.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Bob, can we talk politics for a minute?
Oh, yes. I just want to make sure I got those stories in.
You have been elected to Congress multiple times. You know the Republican Party. You used to be inside it. Brett Kavanaugh, the process, the hardcore right-winger, Donald Trump, I mean, last night Donald Trump said Democrats have proposed legislation to have open borders. He's lying through his teeth. No Democrat would ever do that. No Democrat supports that. He's been lying about Brett Kavanaugh, saying, that this is entirely fabricated and it's been entirely debunked. And neither of those true. To what extent will right-wing hate radio and Fox News, both owned by billionaires, I should point out, to what extent should they be able to deliver more victories to the Republican Party versus, the angry and upset women and the allies of women across the United States who are looking at this as the last gasp of patriarchy?
I don't think that Fox, cares, of course, because look who they just hired as their communication director, Hope Hicks.
Oh, really? And the White House has Bill Shine, who is supervising the Kavanaugh nomination, who himself has been accused of sexual harassment.
It's a switch. You got Shine, and then all of a sudden Hope Hicks now goes to Fox, and Hope Hicks was in the White House, as we know, and very, very close to the president's daughter. So I don't think Fox is really looking to, in any fashion or form, have itself as a fair entity by any stretch of imagination. They will, however, do what they just did, which is to produce, for the Republicans, especially the right, will produce a lot of cover, a lot of, of news slanted towards that direction. But I will point out, even with that occurring, and a lot of money behind it, which helps, what does that help? It helps Republicans that are unsure how they're going to vote. Because, you see what I'm saying? The base is ginned up by the use of money through the corporate media.
So the question in my mind, after 92, after Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill, there were a lot of women who got elected in 92, and Bill Clinton got elected in 92. What do you expect the political consequences of this will be in terms of the elections?
That's the great question, because here's what I think is going to happen. And I'm going to refer to President Obama for how it's carried out to happen. But what I think is going to happen is, first of all, people are protected because you asked the right question about, all the money spent and it's pumped out there and you've got a lot of protection and people are watching Fox, et cetera. They give you protection in your base. Even with Senator Manchin, for example, the base is a bit calmed down, even though Mitch McConnell's still after him because of his vote.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, the repercussions, I think, are going to be pretty easy. No matter how they comforted the road for the vote, all right, for Kavanaugh, the road's going to be very difficult because there is a definite gender gap, any way you look at it, including Republican female voters not supporting Republicans in general. There is a gender gap, any way you look at it. Number two, there is also an independent gap now who are up for grabs, who may have not went for Hillary Clinton but went for Donald Trump. Then you come to how the base is fired up. The conservative base, I think this is very important, and this would worry me if I was a sitting Republican.
We have half a minute, Bob.
Kavanaugh. Yeah, the conservative base is fired up, but they're happy, so they may stay away. The progressive base is fired up, and they are unhappy, so therefore, if they produce people to get out and vote, they will have some.
Do you think this is a mirror image of the Tea Party? You had all these Republican activists out in the streets yelling and screaming, and it produced a wave of elections for Republicans. Now you've got, women and their allies out in the streets saying, hell no, and will that produce
it could be, and if they get the vote out, yes, they will create a wave.
Yeah, the key is getting the vote out and making sure that Republicans haven't suppressed that vote in the individual states. I mean, you look at Georgia, over 400,000 people were removed from the voting rolls last year by Brian Kemp, who's running for governor now against Stacey Abrams. Right. Anyhow, Bob Ney, Talk Media News. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Always good talking with you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
There was a new poll out from Public Affairs Council and Morning Consult. And what this poll found was that while the news media is trusted as a primary source for what's going on, 46% of Americans say they trust the news media, 71% of Americans said that they trust their friends and neighbors as a source of media more than the news media, 71%. Now, what that means is that you, as a Free Speech TV viewer, are well informed on what's going on, far more so than the average person. So you have an opportunity now to be the news source for your friends, your neighbors, your family, whether it's on Facebook or talking to people at the store or your next door neighbors or whatever it may be. And you have an opportunity to let them know about this great news source here, Free Speech TV. Tell them how they can find it. You can go to freespeech.org. You can find all the places where people can watch Free Speech TV. Thank you. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of Fugitive Planning and Black Study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten thinks Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what the we who cohabit in the space of the undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out
the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I find this absolutely fascinating. Joe Manchin votes to confirm Brett Kavanaugh. I suspect that this is going to mean that Joe Manchin's probably going to lose his race in West Virginia. I think that Heidi Heitkamp made the right political calculus. That in North Dakota, I mean, she's, what, 12 points down right now, I think? But she decided to vote her conscience and, you know, the truth that was in front of her. And Joe Manchin decided to vote with the Republicans. And right now, a lot of people are putting money into Heidi Heitkamp's campaign. She's getting support that she didn't have before. People are volunteering to help her out, even though she's not always a liberal, but she's a Democrat. And I frankly don't know if that same thing is happening for Joe Manchin. I would be surprised. I think that he thought, and sometimes I wonder if he's the brightest bulb on the tree. I think he thought that, you know, well, if I vote with the Republicans, Mitch McConnell will be nice to me, Donald Trump will be nice to me. You know, and that'll help me get through this election because, after all, Trump carried West Virginia by 40 points or something like that, 42 points, which is huge. So he thought, you know, I'll lay down with these dogs and I don't think I'll have fleas when I get up. Right after that vote, Donnie Trump Jr. tweeted, a real profiling courage from lion liberal Joe Manchin. He waited until Kavanaugh had enough votes secured before he announced his support. I bet he had another press release ready to go if Collins went the other way. West Virginia, vote for MAGA champion Morrissey. And then, you know, a link to the guy who's running against Joe Manchin. So, I mean, literally minutes after his vote, the Trump crime family comes out and attacks him. I would give almost anything. Well, you know, actually, this is more moderate curiosity than fascination, but I would love to know what's going on in the Manchin campaign right now. I wonder how this is working out for him. I want to see him reelected. We need Democrats in the Senate. But I suspect that without the Democratic base in West Virginia, and, you know, keep in mind, you know, West Virginia is startlingly progressive. Without the Democratic base in West Virginia, Joe Manchin, I think, is going to be toast. Heidi Heitkamp, maybe she'll pull out of this. Meanwhile, Karen Pence has decided that she is going to make her political statement. This is the wife of Mike Pence, our esteemed vice president. I told you the story last week about Purvi Patel, this Indian-American woman, Indian, not Native American, who had a stillborn child, gave birth to a dead baby, and was arrested in Mike Pence's Indiana, prosecuted in Mike Pence's Indiana under a feticide law that was put into place to jack up, you know, ultimately it was setting the stage for anti-abortion laws, but the way that they sold it, the way the Republicans sold this was, if somebody kills a woman and she is pregnant, you can charge them with 2 murders. Right? That was the whole intent of the law. But instead, they started, and Purvi Patel, by the way, was the second woman prosecuted in Mike Pence's Indiana for this. Instead, they started prosecuting women who had stillbirths, saying that they had induced abortions, illegal abortions, late-term abortions. And in fact, Puri Patel submitted to a blood test. There were no abortifacient drugs in her system. There was no evidence of an abortion. There was no abortion doctor. There was no nothing. Just a dead, stillborn child or fetus or whatever you call it at that stage. And she was facing 30 years in prison. And Mike Pence's Indiana sentenced her to 20 years in prison. And that was overturned by a federal judge, which is the status of all that right now, who said, hey, there's no evidence that she actually committed an abortion. But, expect this. This is, the whole periods for Pence thing. Remember this? We did it on this show back 6-8 years ago when Mike Pence was governor of Indiana, and he was trying to get this law passed that said that essentially if women were late on their periods and thought they might be pregnant or found that they were pregnant, they had to essentially report themselves to the police department. And if they lost that child, if they had a miscarriage or an abortion, they had to give a funeral by law, a $5,000 minimum cost funeral to that, whether it was a little tiny bloody speck or whether, it's something much larger, they had to have a funeral. And if they failed to do that, they went to prison. So the woman that Mike Pence calls mother, his wife, Karen, has decided she's going to make her political statement by supporting a fellow, Mark Harris, who is running for Congress, who says, he's facing Dan McCready, by the way. This is in South Carolina. And Dan McCready is a Democrat and a good Democrat. He's a Marine veteran, a business owner, and a good Democrat. So if you're looking for a place to somebody to support, Dan McCready should be at the top of the list too. But the guy running against Dan McCready is this whack job Harris that Karen Pence is going to campaign for. She's going to, I don't know if this was last Friday or this is next Friday. This is from October 8th. Well, that's today, so it'll be this Friday. She's going to be in a campaign rally for this guy. So what does this guy have to say? Well, according to the Charlotte Observer, in an editorial last month, he said, women have lost basic skills like how to prepare a meal, how to sew on a button, or how to keep a home. He loves to quote Ephesians 5:22, women, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. In a sermon February 3rd, 2013, he said the majority of marital problems could be linked to couples not following that guidance of Ephesians, that women should submit themselves to their husbands as if their husband was God. In fact, he said in that sermon, quote, many marriages could save beaucoup of marriage counseling money if they would just understand. Husbands, love your wives even as Christ loved the church. Wives, submit yourself unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. He told women in this video that they should submit to their husbands because the Lord ordained it. Now, this is the wife of Mike Pence. Mike Pence will not have dinner alone with any woman other than mother. He literally refers to Karen as mother. Well, mother, what do you want to do now? Well, mother, what shall we have for lunch? Well, mother, there's not another woman sitting at this table. Well, mother, I haven't had a private meal with another woman since we got married. This is our vice president. Let us not forget. This is the guy who, if Trump stumbles, will be running for president in 2020 on the Republican ticket, in all probability. This is the guy who, if we impeach Trump, becomes president. You want Handmaid's Tale brought to the United States circa 2020? All you got to do is look at Mike Pence. We all need to wake up. This is obviously the Brett Kavanaugh worldview. We now have, what, 6 or 7 Catholics on the court. It's not the worldview held by all Catholics by any stretch of the imagination, but it seems to be the one held by at least the right-wing Catholics on the court. Certainly it was Scalia and Thomas and Rehnquist, and Kennedy was a little more liberal. Alito, and now, Barf Barfo Kavanaugh is going to join the court. Meanwhile, in misogyny, the neo-Nazis have, for years, they have called Taylor Swift an Aryan goddess. There was some picture of her with a guy with a swastika a couple of years ago, and it was like, proof. The ideal white woman. Well, Taylor Swift has now come out and endorsed Tennessee Democrat Phil Bredesen. And the right-wingers are going crazy over on 4chan. Stupid B-word doesn't respect the Trump curse. She has to learn the hard way. Another particularly bitter 4chan user said that she's going to die of a stroke this month as divine retribution for her betrayal. Another one says, we must save her. Oh, the poor little snowflakes over on the far right. The poor little snowflakes. So, a good time to buy a Taylor Swift album, huh? Anyhow, where do you see this going? I'm actually rather encouraged. And I want to tell you about packing the court. I'll give you a little riff on that when we come back from the break. Stick around. It's 16 minutes, 42 seconds past the end.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Boy, it's getting weird out there. I'll tell you the whole story behind this right after the break. Stick around. And welcome back. Don watching Free Speech TV in Winnsboro, South Carolina. Hey, Don, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Tom. Good to talk to you again. I heard you speaking earlier. I listen to you almost daily when I get a chance and tape you. You spoke about Trump maybe benefiting from the economy crashing in the next few months, and if it continued a bit longer, that he could even be a threat of 2020?
If they can time the crash, if the Democrats take the House and they let the economy at least, exhale a little bit, and then blame that on the Democrats, that's a narrative that the Republicans and Fox News will run, and right-wing hate radio will run with for the next 2 years. Absolutely. I've seen it before.
Okay, but what I wanted to talk to you about, Tom, is when you mention stuff like that, it needs to be, the Americans and people in general have short attention spans and memories not so good.
Yep.
But we have a Mr. Mueller probe going on, and there's no way in my mind that the Trump regime cannot be dealt with all the people being convicted and all of the investigation going on. I don't see how he can be the president more than a few more months. I tire that it hasn't something more come out, and he's got all the stuff on the table that we could get rid of this person in the presidency. But I'm just concerned that more radio and TV I listen to, the less people are talking about the Russian mob and the Trump dynasty, the U.S. mob and the Trump dynasty, and a lifetime of corruption and crime. Right. And we're talking about he might be reelected in 2020. I'm afraid that people are hearing, when they hear it, it's repetition, and that's the way people learn. And too many people are learning that he might be president again. And in my mind, I don't see how he isn't the president. He's not legitimate. And how can he possibly be elected in 2020 with all this corruption, lifetime, and what's going on? So it concerns me that people talk as if the Mueller investigation isn't happening and that things are going to come out, hopefully, that will get this person out of the U.S. presidency.
The difference between what we're seeing right now and what we saw in 1998, as I recall, was that when Ken Starr was doing his investigation of Bill Clinton, Brett Kavanaugh, who worked for him, was regularly leaking salacious details to the media. Brett Kavanaugh at that point in time was a right-wing hitman for Ken Starr. And so, if they discovered that Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky had done something particularly weird or disgusting in their minds, they, the whole thing with the cigar and stuff like that, they leaked that to the media. The Mueller investigation has not had a single leak. And that's because the Mueller investigation, instead of being run by right-wing operatives, is being run by FBI agents and professional prosecutors. So the question, and I think you raise a really good point here, Don, the question is if Mueller comes out and finally says, okay, here's my report, it's 227 pages, it's got 100 different indictments in it, all this stuff, will we simply go into overwhelm and ignore it? As opposed to if they had been leaking out bits and pieces day by day over the whole prior year, would we have been primed for it and ready for it? I think that may well be the case. But the reason, Don, that you're not hearing the steady drip, drip, drip is because it's not being coordinated by the Special Prosecutor's Office the way it was during the Ken Starr investigation when he was the Special Prosecutor. So, and I share your concern, Don. Thank you for the call. We'll be right back. There was a new poll out from Public Affairs Council and Morning Consult. And what this poll found was that while the news media is trusted as a primary source for what's going on, 46% of Americans say they trust the news media, 71% of Americans said that they trust their friends and neighbors as a source of media more than the news media, 71%. Now, what that means is that you, as a Free Speech TV viewer, are well informed on what's going on, far more so than the average person. So you have an opportunity now to be the news source for your friends, your neighbors, your family, whether it's on Facebook or talking to people at the store or your next door neighbors or whatever it may be. And you have an opportunity to let them know about this great news source here, Free Speech TV. Tell them how they can find it. You can go to freespeech.org. You can find all the places where people can watch Free Speech TV. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. You know, I said before the break, it's starting to get weird. Here in Oregon, for example, there's a guy who for years and years has been putting these right-wing ballot initiatives on the ballot. And he's got this Measure 103 and Measure 104. And what these things are is actually writing into the Constitution that it's against the Constitution of Oregon to have a tax on sodas. It's against the Constitution of Oregon to have a tax on food. Now, we don't have a tax on groceries right now. And I mean, I know Republicans have repeatedly tried to get one in, but nobody ever took those seriously. But this guy, and they're running these ads that are designed to appeal to liberals, where you get this guy who looks like he's in a health food store saying, you know, we need to prevent politicians from putting a tax on our groceries. But what it actually is like, you know, the biggest dream of the soft drink industry, and not to mention the grocery industry, to have their tax breaks carved into the Constitution. And it's being put forward by a right-winger. It's incredible how, and this is the problem with ballot initiatives, is if a group has enough money, they can lie to you about the ballot initiative, and, oh, gee, that makes sense, I think I'll go with that. Sure, I'd love not to have, you know, taxes on my groceries. So anyhow, there's that going on. And then the other thing I wanted to riff about a little bit, I talked about this in the first hour of the program, but it's really worth revisiting, is, you know, Trump's constant lies. You know, we talked in the last hour about Trump's constant lies. What is the antidote for his lies? What is the agency, the institution, the group that can hold a president to account when he lies? When he says things like he did last night, that every Democrat in the Senate has signed on for this legislation authored by Dianne Feinstein called the Open Borders Act. It's a complete lie. It's a complete fabrication from the ground up. There's not a single bit of truth to it. Is the media running around with their hair on fire? Oh, my God, the president is a liar. No, he's gotten us used to it. He has normalized it. And that's a problem, because the media is the only thing that can out these things. That's why we have a media. That's why we have First Amendment protections in the media. And that's also why Donald Trump started his presidency attacking the media, because he knew bad things were going to come out about him. He knew the collusion with Russia was going to come out. He knew his links to mob bosses was going to come out. He knew that the scams the entire Trump crime family has been involved with were going to come out. I believe this is why Ivanka shut down her business, because it was starting to come out that her business partner was mobbed up or internationally corrupt. Not to mention, making their stuff in China and getting all these patents. And I mean, it's corruption top to bottom. Well, how do you prevent being wounded by the media reporting about how corrupt you are? You take down the media. And now Trump has raised this to a whole new level. This weekend on Fox News, he sat with Jeanine Pirro, Judge Jeanine, and said, we need to be able to put people in prison or fine them huge fines for speaking out against me, essentially. I mean, specifically what he said was that there should be, quote, consequences for those people who accuse Judge Kavanaugh. Donald Trump wants to be able to sue or imprison Christine Blasey Ford. Donald Trump wants to be able to sue or imprison Deborah Ramirez. Donald Trump wants to be able to sue or imprison Julie Swetnick. Donald Trump wants to be able to sue or imprison anybody who is talking about the crimes of the Trump crime family. He's calling for our libel laws to be rewritten and our First Amendment to be pushed aside. And guess who might agree with him? 5 hardcore right-wing Federalist Society justices on the U.S. Supreme Court. This could get really, really bad, because the press is the only thing left. Look at what had just happened to a member of the press, a Saudi member of the press. He was apparently just murdered by the Saudis.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
In Turkey, for God's sake, he goes into the embassy to get permission to marry this woman, proof that he's divorced so he can marry this woman, and apparently they killed him.
We're reading today from Warrior Is by Harley and Robin Zephyr. It's the story of their great-grandfather who, in real life, killed Custer at Little Bighorn. And in fact, there's a map of the war, as it were, the battle. And they say that he is now the spirit keeper of Custer, which is remarkable. And there's a page-and-a-half introduction to the book, and then it becomes, a historically accurate novel, basically. This story is the traditional and cultural account of the life of Nikogju Lakota warrior Mato Nyanpi, saved by bear, which his name in English, also later known as Scarleg. Warrior is based upon a true story. What you are about to read has been told to us through our family, passed down as oral history from generation to generation. Every family has its own story. This is ours. It's up to you to visualize and experience the events described herein in order to determine what you believe or what you choose to accept from what you learn from these pages. You've likely never read a story quite like this before. In Warrior Is, the reader is able to visualize and experience the events and circumstances of Mato Nyanpi's life. Many times the story is told in the present tense, such as if you were walking with Saved by Bear and his people as the events unfold. This was our original manner of storytelling. Other times the story is narrated in the past tense to account for a past perspective. Those of us who may not be entirely fluent in particular words or specific language, as much as we may be fluent in spirit and honest communication, the life messages many times can be more meaningful than just the written or spoken words. Warrior Is follows the timeline from the time of creation, moving through Saved by Bear's birth in 1849, and going up to July 1876, 2 weeks after the Grass Battle. Please exercise your free will and follow your conscience when reading this story. The spiritual side is called upon you to open your spirit so that you may read this tale and learn about these events through your own spirit. And, continues sort of like in that line, but here, right to the book. Prologue. He smelled the yellow of the sun. His spirit was alive and energetic. He felt the energy in his chest and all along the blood running through his veins. He looked to his left to see his great friend by his side. The strong scent of sage caressed his nostrils and reminded him of home. The movement over the high-running hilly ridge to the south caught his eye. He and Swift Bear sensed and felt the pathway opening up. So much had occurred so quickly, so suddenly, so dramatically. Their call to duty, his call to duty, filled his mind, his heart, his spirit. Today, it was meant to happen. It was presented to the people from the Creator. The plan was made. The warriors summoned. The preparation was done. It all led to this place, this portal in time. The sparse clouds to the west resembled mare's tails, and for a brief moment he remembered his white stone friend in the White Mountains. He remembered his spiritual commitment to protect his people, Grandmother Earth, and the sacred Hisapa. And time stood still for a moment, a small moment in time, through all of the ancient and original history of all the moments of time. And as the group of the horse-mounted soldiers rode briskly over the far ridge, the Creator shined that warm, nurturing light upon these warriors, such as Creator had been doing since the beginning of time, since the beginning of Grandmother Earth and Grandfather Sky, and at the beginning of all things. All the moments of time forever had arrived here, now. It had come to this. Creator's strong will and great invisible hand had placed them here. It was the Creator all along. It always was. It always would be. For one to know what led the young Lakota warriors to be here at this fateful site near the Greasy Grass River on this warm, sun-drenched day, one must go back in time, way back to the beginning, when it was only the Creator, and the Creator of all things decided to create a new world. Her name would be Unsimaka, Grandmother Earth, and she would be created to hold and sustain life. All kinds of beings, all kinds of people would be given and placed upon and within her to show her love of life. And this is how it all began. Chapter 1, Origin. The human beings evolved from the spirit. Before arriving in Wind Cave, we were star people. Many of us came from a place called the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters, an ancient star grouping and constellation that contains worlds comprised of the gift of life-giving water. Water is life, Mini Wikoni. The Pleiadian influence is an absolute, but those of us who claim to be relatives of the Pleiadians share a common bond with other indigenous people, regardless of where we are geographically on the earth. We will always remain Pleiadian star people. Spiritually, we have become human beings of different races and ethnicities, but the origin of our spirit is the water. And for us, and as to who we are, as the tribal people in a family way, our name is Minkoju, its evidence. It means life's subsistence through the gathering and planting by the waters and or river. The Minikochu spend their lives living by the waters. This is something that many of our own people do not know or understand, but this is our history. Not only of our physical existence, but also the history of our spiritual existence on Unsimaka. The book is Warrior Is by Robin and Harley Zephyr. There was a new poll out from Public Affairs Council and Morning Consult. And what this poll found was that while the news media is trusted as a primary source for what's going on, 46% of Americans say they trust the news media. 71% of Americans said that they trust their friends and neighbors as a source of media more than the news media, 71%. Now, what that means is that you, as a Free Speech TV viewer, are well informed on what's going on, far more so than the average person. So you have an opportunity now to be the news source for your friends, your neighbors, your family, whether it's on Facebook or talking to people at the store or your next door neighbors or whatever it may be. And you have an opportunity to let them know about this great news source here, Free Speech TV. Tell them how they can find it. You can go to freespeech.org. You can find all the places where people can watch Free Speech TV. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I was talking about journalists. This, in Bulgaria, the government is just legendarily corrupt. and a young woman, a very attractive young woman too. Not that that should matter all that much, but it you know, in this world these days it seems to. Victoria Marinova, 30 years old, a reporter. She just got her own TV show, and the TV show is called Detector, and it's like she's looking into corruption. And she had two reporters on who had uncovered a large-scale and widespread corruption by the Bulgarian government and organized crime in Bulgaria that was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And the news came out this morning. The semi-nude body of 30-year-old Victoria Marinova was found in a park in the Danube town of Ru on Saturday. She had been beaten with such force that she was unrecognizable. She is the fourth high-profile journalist to be killed in Europe since the beginning of this year. Her death follows the alleged slaying of a Washington Post journalist in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. She was raped before she was beaten to death. This is the direction that when democracies fail, this is the direction that they go. When right-wing billionaires or corrupt crime figures come in and basically take over a country. We saw this in Chile with Pinochet. We saw this in Argentina. We saw this well, throughout the former Soviet Union. You're still seeing it in many of these former Soviet states. You see this, frankly, all over the world. We saw this in the Philippines when Duterte took over. That the first thing they go after is the press. And that's what Donald Trump is doing right now, is aggressively, enthusiastically, and viciously going after the press. Be forewarned. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
I agree that something, I think this is a big move. I think it's a big move by neocons, okay?
What's this that you're talking about, Kavanaugh?
Yeah, this Kavanaugh is a prelude. It's a precursor to a really big reorganization in America, appointing Kavanaugh.
I agree.
And it is, and you know, the Lindsey Graham gave it away this weekend in a sound clip. Now I'm just paraphrasing here, but I have the exact quote. But Lindsey Graham asked, "Who do you want running your country? You know, conservatives like Susan Collins, who will provide security and a little money in your pocket, or basically these out-of-control protesters that spit on people." You know, and it's false equivalence. I mean, you know, no one's saying the protesters are going to run the country, number one. And, you know, no one's saying that the protesters are equivalent to Democrats. And then, you know, Susan Collins and those conservatives provide security and money in your pocket. It all sounds, when he said this is a big point in American history.
Yeah, and Susan Rice now looks like she's going to give Susan Collins a run for her money. But I agree with you, Dave. I think that this is a huge change, and I predict that what you're going to see is the Supreme Court is going to start handing down right-wing decision after right-wing decision. It'll start out with, for example, you know, supporting long-term prison sentences or something like that. And pretty soon it'll wander into the territory of overturning Roe v. Wade and cutting back on union protections. And I predict within 2 years, maybe 3, that this Supreme Court is going to be talking about whether is going to be discussing the constitutionality of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. That's the direction that they're going. We're gonna be back to the era of the Lochner Court, and that's going to produce an explosion in this country.
Yeah, and sadly, we can't underestimate Kavanaugh. Yeah, sure, he's disgusting, and he probably does assault or did assault women. But the guy is he's a neocon ideologue. I mean, there is no, to him, labor is your choice. If you're poor and you do labor, it is your choice. We should not punish the wealthy. And he can elucidate and elaborate on that. So these Supreme Court decisions are really, really going to favor the wealthy. I mean, you see it all over the world. I mean, Turkey just, Erdogan in Turkey, he just slipped with his McKinsey. Now he's banning politicians from admitting that they are planning their economy with McKinsey and company out of Massachusetts. This all neocon political and economic thought. And they want to reap the harvest of war, bloodshed, and famine and everything. I mean, I don't want to sound melodramatic, but, you know, I got to put it as quickly as possible.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, and this is something that we all need to be watching very carefully. And once again, it's why we need an independent media, which Donald Trump is trying to destroy. And he's now calling for changes in the libel laws so that he can prosecute people for speaking out. Dave, excellent point, as usual. Robin in Kingston, Washington. Hey, Robin, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm just offering a kind of a change in tactics to get the left to become more effective and efficient electorally. And I've been working almost 20 years now to change our modality, and I've come up with a word called pretest. And it is a process that you use to get engaged in your own governance before legislation is passed, before bad political candidates are elected. In other words, take the energy that you end up using in protest after bad things have happened and disperse it into self-governance in your local area, and then having that power move upward. And the concept of the word is overly simplified, and I'm calling it pretest. And here to me are the 7 words that I would really like Hartmann Nation, and I would like all lefties and liberals, to consider, and here they are. Pretest and vote, or protest and impeach.
Okay. No, these are the directions people are going, Robin. And yeah, spot on. Thank you for that. Rose in West Virginia. Hey, Rose, how's the messaging going with regard to Joe Manchin there in West Virginia?
Oh, it is horrible. It is horrendous. Monstrous ads against Joe Manchin by Trump and Morrissey. So the Democrats really need to get in here and educate the people, because the people are being fooled. They're being fooled that coal has come back, but coal is being mined with robots. They didn't give jobs back.
Right.
And when the teachers were striking, Morrissey wanted to put them in jail. But instead, these ads are trying to paint Joe Manchin as the enemy of the people.
Wow.
So the Democrats have to get back in here and not use that vote for Brett Kavanaugh as a way to say, well, we're not sure that he's a real Democrat. He is not blue dog. He is simply trying to prevent those vicious ads. You have to come and see these ads. They are constant, they are loud, they're monstrous, and they're fooling the people. The people really think, according to Trump and Morrissey, that Joe Manchin is not for the people. But it's just a propaganda campaign that the people have no other way of knowing the truth. So they're being fooled in education, because the first thing the governor did when he came in office was to reduce the budget of education. He put in his own crony as head of education and gave him a raise. So they're not really doing anything for the people. It's kind of like as if the mafia is running. States like West Virginia, Louisiana, New Jersey, Florida. And if the Democrats don't fight harder, it's as if they're knuckling down to whoever these power people are.
Yeah. FDR said,
I don't say that they're just Republicans. They can't be just Republicans, because there must be some decent Republicans. There must be some Republicans who care.
I don't
about
think there are, Rose.
people.
I don't think that, at least at the level of, yeah, I'm sure that there's a bunch of decent Republican voters.
No.
But I'm talking about Republican
Mr.
officials.
Hartman, this is what you got to get. They have to side with the power that be. It's kind of like the NRA. You can't go against the NRA, or you're just setting yourself up to be crushed.
Right.
I hate saying these comments simply because these people are very vicious.
But Joe Manchin goes out and he votes along with Donald Trump for Bardo Kavanaugh, and immediately Donald Trump Jr. attacks him with a tweet.
Yeah, but remember the last part that you said. He held back until he saw that Kavanaugh had it in the bag anyway, and then he voted. He had to vote that way, or Trump would come back with an ad that says he votes with Obama, Nancy Pelosi, and the Clintons. And they've run in all kinds of ads about how they don't want coal, and they're putting it all on Joe Manchin's back. He had no choice but to vote for Kavanaugh.
Yeah, it's amazing how they took that one statement by Hillary Clinton that, you know, the coal is dead, and turned it into
the cue for us is this.
Yeah, turned it into a statewide mantra. It's terrible. It's incredible. Rose, thank you for the call, and good to hear from you. We'll be back. It's coming up on 46 minutes past the hour, and we'll continue our conversation here. Your calls right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
So what do you expect now that we have a right-wing operative, a lifetime political hitman for the Republican Party on the bench? And welcome back. Let's see here. Donald in Vero Beach, Florida. Hey, Donald. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Oh, I've been trying to get a hold of you for years.
So what's up?
I'm a fellow Michigander, and
hey, good on
I want to talk about Bart O'Kavanaugh.
Okay.
Okay, well, I know everybody knows D.C. is awash in alcohol. And being a former alcoholic for 32 years, and then thanks to AA, I've been sober for 30 years, I think I'm pretty much of an expert on alcoholic behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a thing we call denial, and I don't mean the river in Egypt.
Right.
So speaking of blackouts, when I was drinking, I never believed that I didn't even know about blackouts, but people used to tell me I did all these things when I was drinking, you know, and I wasn't accountable. And so when I realized, and even if I did, I wouldn't have admitted it because I didn't want to believe I didn't have control of my drinking.
Right.
So Kavanaugh is a perfect case of being he's a control freak anyways. So no way would he admit to either being an alcoholic or having a blackout, because that way it would perceive guilt on his part, you know, possible guilt that he really did do that. But he instead of saying, well, maybe I was in a blackout, no, he has to lie on it because he's got to cover his ass.
Well, and he also tried to reinterpret the term. I mean, this is a really important point, Donald. He tried to imply that blackout meant pass out, and blackout doesn't mean pass out. It means you continue functioning, you continue talking, you continue walking, you continue raping, whatever it is that you're doing, that Kavanaugh was doing. He keeps doing it. He just has no recollection of it.
Talk about scary, driving blackouts, and end up 40 miles from the last time you remembered. That was scary.
Wow.
But
yeah.
I think, you know, he says, I like beer and I still like beer, to quote him.
Right.
And I think he's still drinking excessively because his facial complexion gives it away. He's got that ruddy, alcoholic facial expression, you know,
the broken blood vessels in his nose and skin. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, I could see I got a big TV set, so when I saw a close-up on him, it looked like he was using pancake makeup.
Yeah.
So I used to do the same thing. My nose, I looked like W.C. Fields in my last few years of drinking, and I used to use my girlfriend's makeup on my nose because I was so ashamed of it.
Wow. Did your body recover after you quit drinking?
Well, I'll tell you, I went to I was diagnosed with cirrhosis, and I'm still alive today. Yes, because I quit drinking.
Yeah.
But I have something against the medical profession, too. This doctor I had, I said, I was going to you for 20 years, and now I come to you for to get checked up for cirrhosis, and it turned out positive. And why didn't you address that? In all those years, so easy to tell. I was only 150 pounds. My liver was enlarged. My stomach was sticking out. My face looked like W.C. Fields. And he says, well, because people get mad at me. I says, for Christ's sakes, maybe, you know, maybe I would have got mad at you, but maybe it would have got through to me.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Could have been a wake-up call. No, I get it.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, Donald, thanks for the call. I think you're right. I think that Brett Kavanaugh is a high-functioning alcoholic, I think is the actual phrase. But, you know, I don't know him personally, so it's hard to make that judgment. Donald, thanks for the call. Great to hear from you. And from a fellow Michigander. We'll be right back. There was a new poll out from Public Affairs Council and Morning Consult. And what this poll found was that while the news media is trusted as a primary source for what's going on, 46% of Americans say they trust the news media, 71% of Americans said that they trust their friends and neighbors as a source of media more than the news media, 71%. Now, what that means is that you, as a Free Speech TV viewer, are well informed on what's going on, far more so than the average person. So you have an opportunity now to be the news source for your friends, your neighbors, your family, whether it's on Facebook or talking to people at the store or your next door neighbors or whatever it may be. And you have an opportunity to let them know about this great news source here, Free Speech TV. Tell them how they can find it. You can go to freespeech.org. You can find all the places where people can watch Free Speech TV. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And just kind of analyzing the situation of the day, right? Roy in Greensboro, North Carolina. Hey, Roy, what's on your mind?
Tom, you're bringing up today a big elephant in the room, and that is that the right wing is getting away with violence and incitement to violence. Any press goes to Donald Trump rallies, they have to have private security. Right. Dr. Blasey Ford supporters, they're being harassed. They're getting death threats.
And she can't move back to her house right now. She's still in hiding. She says it's even worse now than it was before.
Common. Alex Jones, he incited all his followers to give death threats against the Sandy Hook followers. Yeah. He's being sued now, and this has taken forever. They should take all his houses except his smaller ones. They have had horrific death threats. And when Sarah Palin got away with shooting Gabby Gifford, she put rifle sights on her, and sure enough, some kid with armed to the teeth on meds shot her and killed a judge and killed a little girl, Christine Green. Bill O'Reilly, Bilius Maximus O'Reilly, he gets away with saying, Tiller the baby killer. Sure enough, some fat white gun nut goes to his sanctuary, his church, and murders him. This is becoming common, and it's not in the media. It's not in our awareness. Tom, why does the right wing get away with this, and nobody else can? You must know.
There's a heavy bias toward the right wing by our corporate media because the right wing combines those elements that you were just talking about, you know, violence, misogyny, racial hatred, things like that, with deregulation, lower taxes for billionaires, you know, whatever the billionaires want, the billionaires get. The right-wingers who organized this thing back in the 70s, and Lewis Powell laid out the formula for it, they knew that they couldn't get enough people to vote for a Republican candidate if they just simply came out and said, we're going to do whatever the billionaires want. And so instead, they had to bring along, you know, some fairly large groups. So they got the evangelicals by saying, we're going to bring Christianity into government. They got the racists by saying, you know, we're going to trash people of color and keep them down. They got the misogynists by saying, you know, women should submit to their husbands. And they got the homophobes by saying that, you know, the homosexuality is wrong and all this kind of stuff. And that was a big enough coalition. That was those four slices were a big enough piece of America that those people would vote for the Republicans for their own narrow purposes, the anti-abortion people as well. They would vote for the Republicans for their own narrow purposes. And then, but the real tune that the Republicans have been dancing to has always been the rich. I mean, and this was true of Nazi Germany, for that matter. I mean, you know, fascism, Benito Mussolini defined fascism as the merger of corporate and state interests. That's what we're looking at. Roy, thank you for your clear and impassioned call. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, what's up?
Yeah, I think that, you know, I'm speaking about the evangelicals, or I would say fundamentalists. They are so decadent in their religion, their viewpoint, because they have demonized, you know, just like half the population, and they feel justified in that. And I don't see, I'm also a Christian. I can't see where anything in the scripture actually justifies hating people. And I purposely befriended people on Facebook to tell them that. But you would be surprised about how many people, you know, really think that liberals are evil. So once you categorize a group as evil, then the next step is to, you know, pass laws that will discriminate against them, make them wear little yellow stars. The next step is concentration camps, and then ovens. You know, I think that this is where we're headed at.
Well, we're at the concentration camps right now with people of Hispanic ancestry.
Yes, absolutely. And this is
children of Hispanic ancestry.
You know, reprehensible, and they need to be reminded of that. And I encourage people to remind them of it every chance that they can get.
And we're still running these concentration camps, and it's been something like 70 some odd days now since that judge said you must let these children out of these concentration camps. And what are they doing? They're building a new one in Texas, a new concentration camp in the desert in Texas.
And one of the last Nuremberg prosecutors in New Jersey, I can't remember his name, said that this is, you know, it is against the Nuremberg, you know, the findings.
Right, against the principles, yes. These are crimes. These are international crimes against humanity. I agree, John, and I would love to see somebody held to account in this administration. A lot going on. We'll be back tomorrow to continue discussing it right here with you. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. We can't just sit around and complain. That's why I tend not to do a lot of complaining on this program. We need to think about solutions. We need to understand the concepts. We need to get the big picture. So get out there, get active, tag you're it. Tell your friends about our media and wake them up and get them to the polls. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.